Love the sound of that. All right, folks, we're going live on the mic.
How you doing, Suzanne?
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. This is a review board meeting June 3rd. First of all, I'd like to greet everyone. Thank you for being here today, and board members. We'll take the roll in a second, but I wanted to at least say thank you for being here. Thank our staff, thank TPD for being here, thank their presentation. And we really want to thank the members of the public for being here. This is your board, and we want you to feel open and free to participate with us. So know that we're going to give all the issues ample time and consideration. So we don't want anybody to feel rushed. We can't let people talk all day, but we don't want you to feel rushed like we're trying to get you out of here. This is your board, and we're here to make sure that you have open the opportunity to ask your questions and to get your answers. So with that, I'm going to move on. We're going to call the roll first. Let's see, we can go down. We got Tom Napier here. All right. It's Nida Upwood here. And Mr. Here's Cleo. Good to see you. Who's absent right now? Barry and Moses and White. Thank you. And Ms. Hobo. Thank you. Good to see everybody. Hope everybody's doing well.
At this time, there are no modifications to the agenda.
Okay. And has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes from the last May 6th meeting? So, we're going to ask if there is a motion to approve the minutes from May 6th. Okay. We have a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, Mr. Napier had a motion and Ms. Van White, second. Thank you. So it's been motion and second, all in favor of, let me see your hands. Aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move to the next portion of our agenda, citizens input, and we're going to turn it over to the IG for right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start with, I want to thank the board members for volunteering their time to serve on the Citizen Advisory Board. Serving on citizen boards is often a difficult and thankless task, but I know from my conversations with each one of you that you are here for the right reasons, to help make the city you live in a better place for everyone. For the public this year provide their comments for the board to consider, I would like to ask you to remember the people serving on this board are not city employees or elected officials. They are here giving of themselves because they think the things this board can do are important, and they are all hopeful they can make a difference to help ensure the policies and procedures of that TPD officers must follow meet the expectations of the city of Tallahassee. So I'm asking each of you to be polite and be respectful of their time, and don't ask or demand things from the board that they can't do. It will lead to frustration for everyone. With that being said, I'd like to briefly outline the duties and responsibilities of the board. The CPRB has been given the authority to do 4 different things: review internal affair cases, review matters of importance or interest to the public and themselves and the city, make recommendations to the police chief, city manager regarding the policies and procedures of TPD, and filing an annual report with the city commission. Recently, I've heard some public comments that lead me to believe there are some expectations that the CPRB should be able to do things that are clearly outside of its authority. So I'm going to mention a few of the things that I've heard that the board does not have the authority to do. The board does not have the authority to make changes directly to TPD's policies and procedures. The board can make recommendations for policy changes, but those changes can only be made by the chief of police. The CPRB can't review an incident and make a determination whether the officers involved were in compliance with policies or procedures. They can look at an incident, and through the lens of that incident, they can say the relevant policy was or was not adequate to guide and control the officer's actions, or that they believe the policy does not reflect what the community expects from its police department. The board is not here to pass judgment on the actions of officers. The CPRB cannot investigate officers or their actions. The board also can't look into actions that were taken against an officer and render judgment whether those corrective actions were reasonable or appropriate. And finally, the board does not address financial matters or the budget of the police department. Public concerns or issues with the subjects that the board can't address should be taken up with TPD, city management, or the city commission. The incident this board is going to take up tonight involving Jaquez Green is the first high-profile incident this board has been asked to look at. And I'd like to recommend that as a board, we do not rush through this and take our time to ensure we consider all the details that are needed to do this right. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the ombudsman for a few comments and move into the presentation, I believe.
Good afternoon. So at the request of the City of Tallahassee, the Citizens Police Review Board has been asked to review a response to resistance that occurred on May 16th. And in order to kind of adequately review the incident, I requested from the department to provide a use of force expert to give some background, legalese, talk and some of the incident itself, and explain some of the information that they have from the department side. And that expert will also be available to answer questions that you may have after the presentation. I've also provided, or will provide, once the presentation is over, the response to resistance report, which the officer fills out after a response to resistance incident. The reports that each individual officer wrote, so you'll have copies of those, along with the dispatch notes from the call. And I've also brought the body cam footage of all 4 officers, along with the surveillance video that was recovered from the Breezeway area where the incident occurred. And then I will take direction from the board as to what you would like to see, and we'll queue those up and look at those after the presentation. And so I would like to introduce Major Sam Garrett. He is a major with the police department. He's been with the department for over 27 years, taught multiple different things. He has also been supervisor of the internal affairs unit, accreditation and inspection, so he knows about policies, procedures, and how the department got where they were with our general orders. And he's also a high liability instructor, held many positions in the police department, and he's a very good knowledge base in reference to these types of events. And also with him is Sergeant Scott Angulo, who is our sergeant over our training division. He has 19 years of experience and has worked in the department in multiple different roles also. Major Garrett, what's yours? Yes,
Mr. Chairman, did we skip over citizens?
I apologize. I skipped something there, but after looking at things, I think it might be beneficial to the board and the public comments to see TPD's presentation prior to the comments, so that the public can see what we're about to see and have a chance to provide input based on that, as well as whatever comments they were already had prepared before the board.
Well, if there are people here who are, have time limitations, though, I think we ought to let them speak before, if they want to stay, and we can hear afterwards. I'm concerned that people appeared and they know citizen input is on the agenda at a certain time.
Go for it with the public comment.
Why do we see, the whole emphasis is just to make sure that the public is satisfied with the information that they have. We can poll or see if there's anyone that wants to make their comment first, and then we can let that person go ahead if you all would like. But and then we can put this out for the board to make the recommendation. Since this is not anything that we have to vote on, so we can all make a recommendation on this, how we want to go with it. And we appreciate your recommendation of that one. But the emphasis was to make sure that the public had adequate information to ask questions. So we didn't want to shortchange the public in the part as a suggestion. So if there moving back to the public comment, if there's anyone from the public who's time restrained and wants to go ahead and make their comment, I'm not opposed to us let that person come on up in that particular order. And then also, if the board agrees, backing up and allowing the ombudsman to go ahead and make the presentation so that everyone will have the benefit of having knowledge enough to feel that they can make an adequate assessment of what they saw or make informed questions as to what they've been presented.
I mean, I definitely have time constraints and I would like to go when the agenda said we would go. If we do that, and I think we should ask the people who are waiting online as well.
I haven't been made aware of anybody that's registered to speak online. Okay, we'll go ahead and go with public speakers then. The first speaker is Mr. Jeremy Block. Remind you have 3 minutes, and I will give you notice when you're down to 30 seconds. Go ahead, sir.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Block, citizen here in Tallahassee, and like many others, I was able to view the video online and so on and so forth. It was very disturbing. And I guess what I wanted to come here and say was that the policy of the officer, as it was related both in the Democrat and in other formats of the media, if an officer is in a situation where he's allowed to strike a citizen 3 times with a baton, my $64 question is, if 3 officers respond, does that mean the citizen gets hit 9 times? And that was a very salient thing I brought away from watching the video after reading the police report and so on and so forth. Be that as it may, I think the real evil and the real criminal here in this community, along with so many others, is the Police Benevolent Association. The PBA is the bargaining instrument of police departments across the country. Their banks of lawyers are infinitesimal, and they're the ones that brought us the things like the immunity of police officers, which is in the contract. And I just feel that police officing unions are the only ones where their bargaining representatives are able to dictate police policy. In no other business that is unionized have I ever heard the coal workers, the electrical workers. I was in the medical field for 30 years. I was in a union. Nobody ever tried to dictate policy. But in this case, the PBA comes up with these policies that are adopted, approved by the chief, and set in concrete. And I think that's a terrible situation for us to be in. It doesn't allow any input. It doesn't allow any thought. It's just a symptom of keeping the strength where they would like it to stay. And I think that's incredibly unfortunate. The third point I want to address is I'm very, very scared about the use of the rook in our community. Very briefly stated, I'm scared. I'm scared. It's overkill on a level that's unbelievable. Take a look at the Ring Corporation's website, and there's hard pressed to come up even with a movie script that would require that kind of response in a community of our size and of our makeup. So thank you very much for listening, and it's wonderful to see you guys together. I support you, even though I feel some negative things. And I think most of the community does and will. I'm kind of ashamed that there's 5 or 6 of us here. That's very unfortunate, because there's going to be thousands of people that are complaining about what leads this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Delilah Pierre.
Right, 3 minutes? Okay, awesome. I'm Delilah Pierre. I'm Vice President of the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, and I'm basically here to talk specifically about TBD's use of force policy and the brutality used against Jack West Kirkland, but also the use of Marsy's Law. I apologize if I overstep or demand something of the board that I don't mean to. At the same time, it seems like the board has almost no power except the power to report to the chief of police. So, you know, if I make a mistake, please forgive me. Now, I kind of want to talk about beginning, first of all, how ridiculous the passive resistance policy for TBD is, and how often TBD uses their brutality to harm people, but then at the same time seem to be incompetent when it comes to protecting people or saving people. I think a very key case of this is the death of Oluwatoyin Saloon, an activist in Tallahassee whose anniversary is coming up very recently of the day she was literally murdered. TBD was not able, even though dozens of activists, organizers, and thousands of people online were circulating information about her disappearance, to find her. And yet TBD has the power, resources, and intelligence to be able to use drones to surveil protests, surveil Black and brown communities, as the ACLU proved in 2014, and apparently has the power to literally beat Kirkland into a pulp with no justification at all, because he was basically just laying down and being hurt. But I think the worst thing about it was how community leaders and pastors came together to support the use of TBD policy and didn't even inform Jack West Kirkland about what was happening. Didn't even tell him about that, because he doesn't matter. Because his life, what's happening to him, doesn't matter. I think the worst thing that the Tallahassee Police Department does, actually, even though they have literally the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which gives them special privileges that no other person who murders another human being has. No other person has the right to just have the kind of powers that police have from the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, the right to not be questioned or investigated in the same way a normal person is. And yet at the same time, police officers can use the Marsy's Law, a law that claims that they are victims, apparently, to them, even though they're the people committing crimes, to murder people and not release their names or information. If someone murders someone, at the very least, our community should know about it. We don't know who killed Tony McDade. We only know who killed Michael Johnson because there wasn't a lot of attention in media on the situation. We don't know who killed Raheem Reeder. And I think that's another really prominent use of TBD's, force. Recently in Chicago, a law was passed that stopped allowing police officers to pursue people on foot. And I think y'all should think about reviewing TBD's pursuing people on foot policy as well as their use of force policy, because it seems in these situations they continue to escalate and harm people, even though Raheem Reeder never hurt anyone, never damaged anyone, and his supposed hostage, as you say, Valerie Haddon, is right now being tried for Raheem Reeder's murder. That doesn't make any sense to me. TBD killed Raheem Reeder. Valerie Haddon is not responsible for Raheem Reeder's death. Why does she have charges against her? How's that right? How's that just in any way? And for the use of Marsy's Law, I don't see any kind of method or ethical accountability that can be gained from that. All I want to say finally is, y'all as the CPRB need to demand more power from TBD or abolish yourselves and allow community control of the police to be instated.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Sierra Bush Rester.
Hi, how's everyone doing today? I appreciate you guys being here and volunteering your time. I did want to just say one thing with the role of this board. It is my understanding that you guys not only report to the City Commission, but you also report to Tallahassee Police Department. And so the City Commissioners actually also have the power to change policy because they have the power to create and direct what TPD does. So it is not just the police that you are reporting to, and you can make suggestions for. So continuing on, I've got quite a few things to say. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that we really do need to review TPD's use of force policy when it comes both to active and passive resistance. Last night, Chief Lawrence Revel claimed that their use of force was within policy because the guy was actively resisting. However, when I looked up the definition of active resisting, it said that you had to be pulling away actively from the officer and basically physically trying to move and demonstrate that you are not complying. That is active resistance. Active resistance cannot be defined as not moving or little movement or refusing to do something by not moving. That is passive resistance. And in order to beat someone with a baton, you have to be actively resisting. I have a lot of issues just with the idea that anyone deserves to be beaten for anything. But what I will say is that as a mother to 3 children, I have an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old, I sat down and I thought to myself, how am I going to explain to my children that when a police officer pulls them over, how they are supposed to show that they are complying? Because what it looked like to me when I watched that video is that that man was complying. He was on his stomach, his hands were behind his back, and he was not moving. And the only reason it's considered resistance is because the officer shouted, "Stop resisting." And so what I am now well aware of is that it is resisting if the police officer wants it to be resisting, because passive resistance is so loosely defined. We need to get rid of passive resisting, because the other thing too is people's biological responses,
30 seconds
i.e.
remaining.
flight, thank you, or fight response, such as not moving. People are being punished for their biological response. I would have frozen up. I don't even know what I would have done. Luckily, for me, and this is really unfortunate, for other people, my children are white, so they'll probably be safe from TPD.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Anthony DeMarco.
Hi, it's Anthony DeMarco. Good afternoon, everybody. So as already been touched on before is the use of force policy. So what we already have all seen is one of the officers was using his impact weapon / baton on a defenseless person being held on the ground by 2 other officers, possibly 3, while having one hand handcuffed. After reviewing the use of force policy, I strongly suggest we take a look at it. How can we have rule of law where the law enforcement manipulate policy so they have no rules? For instance, Tallahassee Police Department General Order number 60, which is a total of 19 pages. Procedure 5, Section F3A states, officers may use impact weapons / batons to strike large muscle groups, for example, legs, buttocks, upper arms, forearms, to overcome active resistance when the person is making an apparent effort to escape by pushing or pulling away or physically defeating an officer's attempt to get close. Also in Procedure 5, Section F3B, under definitions, active resistance is defined by physically evasive movement with or without verbal resistance to defeat an officer's attempt at control, but not intended to harm the officer. Examples include, but are not limited to, linking arms with each other, bracing or tensing, attempting to push or pull away, running play. I've reviewed the tapes, every angle, multiple times, saw none of this. In the video, we see Mr. Kirkland being beaten by the police. According to policy, the officer committed what I would say is an unlawful act. From all the video we've been able to see, at no time did Mr. Kirkland meet the criteria per policy for the officer to use force in striking him with an impact weapon. I'm here to ask the City Citizen Review Board hold a workshop on Tallahassee Police Department use of force with the city manager and the chief of police to answer clarified language and verbiage in the use of force policy for citizens to understand. And we will be submitting a copy of this email.
30 seconds remaining.
And also, under definitions for passive resistance, it's a really excellent example of language. My last 30 seconds. Passive resistance requires no or little active physical resistance. I think it'd be easier to say it requires no physical resistance. Much more clear. You know, I mean, like when we speak to each other, do I say I have no or little, or do I say
Your time is
I
expired.
have very little? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have one more speaker, Mutaki Akbar.
Hello, good evening. Again, my name is Taki Akbar, and I'm here on behalf of the Tallahassee Brains of the NAACP. I got involved looking at this case just in my capacity as the president of the NAACP. I'm not representing Mr. Kirkland. I know that was in the media, but I'm not representing him. But this did raise a lot of issues as far as the like what we pay attention to with the NAACP. We did show this video to the organization. We had a lot of discussions publicly about what was on the video, and and I think you all are in a great position now to really look at it to one, determine if what you see is consistent with what TPD's conclusion is that it's within policy. And then if it is, I think there also needs to be the question of is this the type of policing that we want in the city of Tallahassee? Is it okay for anybody to look at an 8-second video or a 2-minute video and see somebody laying on their stomach, getting hit by a baton with at least one hand behind their back? Is it okay? Is this the type of police that we need? Is it the type of police that we want? And does it do anything to further shorten that gap? Take away from that gap that we have that affects the relationship that our community has. When I say our community, just the community at large has with the Tallahassee Police Department or any law enforcement agency as a whole. One of the things that Chief Rebel said that, it is within policy, but he said, hey, if it's something that we need to look at within policy, then let's look at it. So we can't just look at it and say, hey, it's within policy, let's move away from it, if that's the conclusion that you all make, because you all can look at it with your own eyes. But if you do make that conclusion, I invite you all to take it further and say, is this what we want to see in our policy? Is this the type of policing that we still need in the city of Tallahassee? And if it's not, let's do something to change that policy. I personally and other members of the NAACP and other people that we talk to about this in the community does not see this as a necessary need in the community. I don't know necessarily what the alternatives are, but it's now the time for us to start having these conversations as opposed to just writing it off as something that's within policy. Thank you.
Thank you. That is our last speaker, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll move back now to the number 5. Thank you all, everyone, for your participation. We appreciate it very much. So we're going to move back to item number 5 to go ahead and get the presentation from our ombudsman. So, Deputy Chief.
Mr. Gary.
All right, good evening. I know a number of you guys here on the review board have participated in the Citizens Police Academy. I appreciate that. Unfortunately for you, this is cruel and unusual punishment because you have to listen to me again tonight. Okay? Tonight we're going to be very specific. We're going to cover this incident and go through it, and we're going to discuss why the officer's actions were reasonable and how they were within policy. We'll say kind of really focused on this incident to start with. But again, to make it even crueler, you guys have had some of this at the Citizens Police Academy, so we're going to do a little bit of legal review just for a bit of background. We'll try to get through this. Okay, so first question for everybody is, when can the police detain someone? If you're just walking down the street, can the police stop you for no reason? No, they can't, right? Police have to have some authority over a citizen to be able to stop them. Officers can get out and talk to anyone, just like any citizen can talk to anyone. But a citizen does not have to stop, and does not have to cooperate with the police. The police have no authority to detain them in some way, shape, or form. And we'll go over what is response to resistance and what is the legal standard for police responding to resistance. Okay, so as we said, the police have to have authority over someone to detain them. Part of that is reasonable suspicion that a person was, is, or will be committing a crime. This reasonable suspicion is based on what the police officer believes, not what the person believes. For example, you leave your house tonight and you decide to go out for a run, and you're wearing your red polka dot shorts and a purple tank top. Unbeknownst to you, 5 blocks away, 2 minutes ago, someone fitting your description committed a burglary wearing red polka dot shorts and a purple tank top. So besides the fashion police stopping you, the real police are going to come down and see you, and they're going to stop you. So you're jogging down the street. You have done nothing wrong. You have simply left your house to go for a jog, but based on the description, the clothing, the distance away from where the crime occurred, the fact that we had a crime that occurred, and that you're running down the street, I think most people agree it is pretty reasonable for that officer to get out, speak with you, and try to determine if you were involved in that crime. So it's not up to the citizen to say, I didn't do anything, I was just jogging, I don't have to stop. The officer has a reason to stop them, and the person would have to comply and stop with the police. And then there's also some other things besides crimes. If somebody meets an involuntary commitment criteria, they're a danger to themselves or others for a mental illness or for substance abuse, and that person needs to go to a treatment facility, then the officers can go ahead and get out with them and may be able to detain them based on the facts and circumstances of that particular incident. Okay. So what is response to resistance? You guys just did the police academy, remember that? Okay. It's what we used to call use of force. Use of force is kind of a misnomer because police just can't use force. Same thing. You are walking down the street, the police can't get out with you and just decide to use force on you for no reason. Police respond to resistance. If there is no resistance, then the police have no right to respond. If there is a response with no type of resistance, then that should be an improper response. Okay. So in essence, it is a suspect's actions, the resistance, that will precipitate a police response. Okay. The legal standard for police response to resistance is that it must be objectively reasonable. It is not what is necessary, it's not what's minimum, and it's obviously not always going to be perfect. The minimum amount of force in any circumstance is no force. Our use of force policy specifically says the objective is to get voluntary compliance in every situation.
Mr. Gary, can I interrupt you just for a second, please? Just for a second, I want to direct this to the board. And I noticed a hand up in the audience, but we don't have a provision for the audience or the public to have a question and answer back and forth with the presenter. So I would suggest if the board is in favor of this, allowing the public just to write their questions out and send them up this way if they have a question. That way we can relate it to the presenter. Are you all in agreement with that?
I agree with that.
With all due respect, trying to make more out of this,
Okay, thank you. So what is the pleasure of the board? You think that's a good idea? We can do that? Okay. So madam, if you have a question, because we don't want anybody to feel ignored. If you have a question, write it down. One of the staff people will bring the question to us, and then we will relay the question.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yes,
So Chair, would it be done at the conclusion of the presentation or during the presentation?
yes, how do you feel about it, sir?
Up to the board, however you want to do it.
Okay.
I think it should be after, that way he can get through it and then answer the question, because keep stopping and going, lose track of time.
Okay, we'll do that then. We'll just hold any questions until afterwards, and then we'll ask them on to you. Okay with you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so minimum would be nothing, and that's not always something that can happen. So if 2 officers go somewhere, if the person that I'm dealing with does not like me or does not like my appearance, they may decide that they want to have that gun they got in their hand and pointed at me, and we have a force situation. Another officer may be able to develop some type of rapport and talk to them when they put the gun down. The circumstances of each case kind of dictate how it goes, but we can't always have no resistance and no response. So minimum is not something we can always get. Necessary. I pull up tonight in my car and I get out in the parking lot. Somebody looks at me, says, I hate the police, and runs to me and pulls out a gun and points it at me. And I say, oh my goodness, and I step back, drop the gun, and I'm forced to shoot. It seems to be relatively reasonable. Someone pointed a gun at me and they articulated that they did not like the police. So I responded and I had to fire my weapon. Well, after the fact, we find out that the person had a BB gun, or they had a gun that had no bullets in it. Okay. So was it necessary to shoot them? Well, not in hindsight, no, it wasn't. But at the time, you can't expect somebody to understand that or to know that there are no bullets in that weapon. It is a reasonable response for that circumstance. The officer's response for reasonableness is judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer. And that's because of the training and the experience and the knowledge an officer has. And it's kind of like, I'm not an airplane pilot. And if somebody said a bird flew into an airplane engine and that airplane's still relatively close to the airport, well, it makes sense they try to turn around and go to an airport. I don't think that I would try to land a plane in the river. That pilot knows the abilities of his plane. He knows his capabilities to fly. He knows how he can put that plane down. He is the expert in that situation. So you would have to judge what he did based on pilots who have kind of the same experiences and training. It's based on the totality of the facts known to the officer at the time. Like we said, with the BB gun or an empty weapon, the officer didn't know that, so you can't go back in hindsight and judge the incident based on what we find out after the fact. We could have the same person who jumped out with a gun and is threatening officers, points a weapon at them and ends up getting shot. And the same thing, we find a suicide note that says that person has no intention of harming anyone else except themselves, and they just want to die. We can't go back and say, well, we now know that this person did not intend to harm anyone, so now we have to judge it based on that. We have to go with what we know at the time. All right, it has to be based on knowledge that officers acted properly under established law. If there is law out there that says what the officer did is wrong, it's wrong. There's things that I call preemptive response. It's just kind of a term that I talk about, and it's, does an officer have to wait for an action to actually occur before they can respond? So if somebody balls back their fist and is going to hit that lady as I'm coming around the corner, do I have to wait for her to actually be hit? Or if I'm running around that corner, would it be reasonable if I continue with my run and try to tackle that gentleman so he did finish his strike? If I tell somebody they're under arrest and they ball up their fists and they say, oh, come get me, we're going to fight, do I have to actually wait for him to fight before I can say, I might not want to go that route? Yeah. Same thing, if we're really going to push it, do we have to wait for a trigger to be squeezed before responding? In some cases, for those again who went through the Citizens Police Academy, we understand that action is a lot faster than reaction. So if you're telling somebody drop the gun, do I actually have to wait until they turn and point a gun at me before I can respond? Because by that time it would be far too late to respond. All right, and then there are little things where do I have to wait for somebody to pull out a gun before I react? And there are small things that officers know or will see. I get out with a person and I notice that their waistband is kind of hanging low because guns are heavy. And I notice that it's kind of the similar shape of a gun or there's a little bulge in the waistband. And people subconsciously index some items they have. So that I'm talking to that person and they just kind of nudge that gun to keep it in place in their waistband. I go, wow, he's got a gun in there. I don't want him to get it out because something bad is going to happen if that occurs. So my partner and I grab that gentleman and we put him down on the ground and handcuff him. That gun never comes out. There's never a shooting incident because of it. But if you're standing 25 feet away and you see two officers grab somebody and put them on the ground, it did not look like they did a whole lot because all he did was index a heavy object sitting here in the front of his pants. Okay. That is a basic, very quick primer on authority and objective reasonableness in regards to police response to resistance. And we're going to kind of take that as our premise or our basis to get into the incident at hand. Does anybody have any on the board have any questions about that before we continue? Okay.
Actually, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am.
We were just a lot about guns and weapons in there and just the displays of violence. This is going to be leading us into the incident that we saw. Are we now going to hear about? Are we now going to hear about not violence or?
We're going to hear about the facts and circumstances of this incident. And yes, this has absolutely nothing to do with the firearm.
Okay.
Okay, so the first thing we have to decide in this incident, do the officers have authority? because we know, as we just said, officers have to have authority to detain somebody. And yes, in this case, I'll say from the very beginning about officers had reasonable suspicion the gentleman was driving under the influence. For those of us in law enforcement, people that fall asleep at stoplights, that is a very good indicator that someone is under the influence. Does it necessarily mean they are? Does that mean they're guilty beyond all reasonable doubt? Absolutely not. But that's an indicator. You know, we've all driven, all of us late at night when we're tired. We've driven in the middle of the day where the sun's nice and warm coming through the windshield and we get tired. And it's called highway hypnosis, not stoplight hypnosis. So the fact that somebody at a red light is falling asleep is a very good indicator just in and of itself that they may be under the influence of a substance. Officer, for safety, puts his car in front of the subject's car so it doesn't drive off or he doesn't get his foot off the brake and it doesn't roll into other traffic. Has difficulty waking him up, makes contact with him, smells what he believes is alcoholic beverage coming from his breath, and ends up summoning a DUI officer to the scene. The DUI officer does field sobriety exercises, and based on those exercises, determines there's probable cause to make an arrest. The reports, there is a report from the arresting officer in regards to DUI that articulates everything the person did wrong or incorrectly during field sobriety exercises that led to that probable cause. So if there's probable cause to make an arrest for DUI, we know DUI is a crime, so that means our authority. I have heard that people say DUI is not that serious. We should let people go for DUI. The National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration has said for 10 straight years, up to 2018, because that was the last year they had their data available, that 10,000 people die every year from that. So that's 100,000 people that have died from DUI crashes in 10 years. So I would say if you don't think that's serious, talk to some of those families. It's a pretty serious crime. So after they developed probable cause to make an arrest, that's when the kind of encounter turns into a response to resistance. And when we look at them, we just don't look at it very basically. We kind of do a pretty thorough look at every response to resistance encounter. What was the authority? Did the officers have it? What kind of tactics did they use? What was the resistance? Did it change during the encounter? Did it go up and down? Did the response levels go up and down? What were factors that would make what the officers did objectively reasonable based on the facts and circumstances of that particular case? What are the body movements of people involved? What are the human and physical dynamics, reaction time, certain things like that? Is what they did consistent with training? Is it consistent with policy? Okay, so in this case, we have our authority. I've heard officers or people say too, hey, they just reached out and grabbed this gentleman. They did kind of tell him to turn around and went over to put hands on him. We really call it like a quick snatch. They didn't tackle him or grab him up, but they did grab him. That is a tactic that is frequently used with people under the influence, so you don't get into a prolonged struggle. If you just say you're under arrest and grab them, or you're under arrest for DUI as you grab them, a lot of times you actually prevent resistance or prevent some type of argument, because that's not the place for an argument. So the authority was explained. That's a quote from the video, and it was repeated several times. The resistance begins as the officers try to put on handcuffs. It's been put out that the resistance occurred after handcuffs were put on, or because the handcuffs hurt. You can see that's the front of the gentleman. His right hand is in front of him. You do not handcuff people in front of him. You handcuff them behind their back. So the fact that he has pulled his arm around him already to me indicates you've got resistance. His hands are not behind his back getting handcuffed. He's pulling them around in front of him. You can see the officer there on the right has handcuffs out. She never actually gets to apply those handcuffs. She is unable to put them on and never actually applies those handcuffs. All right? So, the question is, at this point, is the subject resisting? I would say yes. It's pretty obvious based solely on one clip of the video that he has pulled his arm around in front of him. And he is resisting by the mere fact that they're not behind his back getting handcuffed. Okay. So I would say there's resistance. And we heard during some of the questions, can people be verbally resistant? Absolutely. And what level of authority does that give officers to respond with force? It doesn't. You can be verbally nasty with the police, and that does not give them the right to use force against you. Now, can verbal things give you cues or clues that resistance is coming? Well, you're not putting me in jail. I'm going to kick your butt. Okay, well, that's a clue to some resistance. That is somebody articulating how they are going to resist. So verbal things can give you ideas of how people are going to resist, but in and of themselves, somebody's verbal actions do not give officers to respond physically without some other indication of response. Okay, passive resistance, like I said, passive resistance is playing dead. That's somebody who flops down and says, I'm not going to jail, I'm just going to lay here on the ground. If the officers try to take their arms up and cuff them, they don't stop them, but they sure as heck don't help. If you're going to get them to a police car, they're not going to stand up and walk. They're going to lay there flat. They're going to have to be carried to the police car. That is passive resistance. So in this case, the fact that you're pulling around and moving your arms in front of you, you've already exceeded passive resistance. That is active, and we'll see what that is in a minute. Is it aggressive? Well, aggressive is basically attacking motions towards an officer or being assaulted. We do not have that at this point. And aggravated aggressive is being violently aggressive where you're going to cause serious injury or death to the officer. We're definitely not there. So this is what TBD policy says about active resistance. Okay. Physically evasive movements, you have tensing is underlined and pulling away. You already have that in this situation where he's tensed up and he's pulling his arms back around in front. Right? Our policy says this is the level of response we're allowed to use in regards to active resistance. A restraint or subdue a person who's resisting lawful arrest. You can make a lawful arrest. At the bottom there, we can use physical control techniques and impact weapons or batons. Okay, so some of the concerns are, so TBD policy allows that. What do you do, right? That's the fox guarding the hen house. TBD's policies allow TBD officers to do things. Well, how do we get to our policies? How do we know that we can trust TBD policy? So when we write our policies, they just don't fall out of the sky and land in our laps. We have to look at a lot of things when we create them. So the first thing we do is we look at other agency policies. You just get a bigger hen house and more foxes, right? We look at other agencies. Generally, we look at Florida agencies because we're all guided under the same case law, right? We have the Florida Supreme Court making decisions for the state of Florida. And we also look at other accredited agencies in the state of Florida because we know that their policies have already been looked at by accrediting agencies and they have met standards there. But as I said, that's just a bigger hen house and more foxes. So we look well beyond other agency policies. So back in about 2015, we changed our use of force policy to a response to resistance policy. There used to be a continuum of force that said if somebody resisted here, you could respond here. So in active resistance, if I had somebody who an officer had a right to get out with, and the officer reached out and grabbed them by the arm, they pulled their arm away and said, leave me alone, don't touch me, stay away from me. That's active resistance. And an officer took out his baton and hit him on the arm. Well, by a continuum, that's automatically reasonable. But what if I told you the person that was resisting was an old man at 7th and Monroe who was trying to get back to the senior center and felt he could walk across traffic at 5 o'clock. And the officer reached out and grabbed his arm that was on a walker and said, sir, you can't go across the street at 5 o'clock. And he pulled his arm away and said, leave me alone. It's absolutely not reasonable to hit that gentleman with a nightstick or a baton. So that is why the continuum kind of went away and we got into this objective reasonableness standard is you have to judge every incident in and of itself based on the facts and circumstances of that incident. So when we did that policy in 2015, these are a lot of the things we looked at. And policy is a living document. Things change over time. New case law comes out. New recommendations come out. So we continue to look at things as it goes. We looked at the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. We looked at PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, which comes in and gives direction to agencies and tries to give them best practices and procedures. We look at DOJ reports. Okay, we just came up with a presidential executive order about who to intervene and not using chokeholds except for deadly force circumstances. So we always continue to look at things and evolve our policies, and we look outside of law enforcement and anything that we can use. Like when we created ours, we looked at Leon County Emergency Medical Services. Hey, when should we provide first aid after a response to resistance encounter? And we try to figure out when the best time and how that should be in our policy in accordance with some medical guidelines. And we looked at even more, because we want to make sure that we are not just putting out any policy that meets minimum standards. We want a policy that is the best out there. So we continue to look at these. We look at private agencies. Lexipol is kind of a risk management company that puts out a lot of law enforcement and first responder information. Some of these things where you look at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, their national consensus policy for use of force. Okay? So why is it a national consensus? Well, on the bottom, those are all the groups that try to participate in making a recommended policy for all the agencies in the country. We looked at actually the U.S. Conference of Mayors report on police reform and racial justice to see what in any of these things are applicable so we can create the best policy possible. So our policy isn't just fall out of the sky, it's not just based on law enforcement standards. We looked at numerous resources, we reviewed numerous policies, we talked to our accreditation person over at CALEA, and we went through everything to come up with the best policy that we could to ensure that we maintain very high standards. All right, so back to this incident. Now we got to know what policy says and what type of resistance we have. We have active resistance that's continuing. The first picture up there, this is, again, from the front. This is the gentleman's arm pulled up in front of him, in front of his stomach. So we see he's got a clenched fist, his arm is not behind his back, and he's not complying. That is the same arm in the next picture there to the right, where the officer kind of got him up in a crook of the elbow. She has her handcuffs out in the other hand, and he's pulled his arm around in front of him. This one's a little difficult to see. That's grabbing his wrist in front of him and holding his hands together so the police cannot pull his hands apart. Okay. Officers start struggling with him. They're trying to take him down on the ground. As you see in the video, they all stagger backwards. They kind of bang into the wall. They stagger around. Again, he's using his legs and bracing so he doesn't go to the ground. Also, the other officer, the male officer that was on the left-hand side, managed to get one handcuff on. So that was not something that this gentleman actually chose to arm himself with, but now he has an open, dangling metal handcuff hanging from his hand. So he starts swinging that arm around. Unless it clicks back closed, you've got that swinging around off his arm. So that is a concern for me because I don't want to get hit with a handcuff. So I know the officers are on scene would be concerned about a handcuff hanging off of his arm. Okay. So far we look and we say to the officers, what are they doing? Is it proper right now? Okay. All they are doing right now is responding with physical control techniques. That is basically using their hands, their body to try to overcome the resistance. And it's objectively reasonable to use physical control tactics to try to overcome active resistance. And I've also heard there's 3 of them, it should be no problem putting them on the ground. Okay. Is it always as easy as you think to pull somebody down to the ground? And the reason I use the football ones is because I think we've all seen it and kind of can relate where everybody may not have been in a physical confrontation trying to pull someone to the ground. But we all know a lot of times you get guys that are trained to tackle people, they're professional football players. And one hits somebody from one direction, another guy tackles from another direction, and it's not a great choreographed dance. You don't know which way the runner's going to move or how he's going to use his body. Same in response to resistance. They don't know how the subject's going to resist, so you may have an officer pulling one way, the other officer pulling the other way, and they're actually kind of counter-indicating each other. They're not, one's pulling trying to knock him down this way, one's pulling trying to knock him down this way, so the bad guy's still standing up. So it's not always as easy as people think it is just to get somebody down to the ground. Okay. Same thing, there's 3 of them there. They should be able to pull his hands behind his back. Okay. Is it easy to pull somebody's hands behind your back as you think it is? Anybody on the board would like to try, this is not a trick, this isn't a secret. Sergeant Angulo is 5'7", 170 pounds, about the same size as the gentleman in this incident. If anybody wants to kind of come up and lock his arms together, you guys pull on his arms to see if it's difficult to pull them apart. It's not a trick. This isn't a circus show. I'm not trying to make light of it, but a lot of people have not been in physical confrontations and don't understand how hard it really is to pull somebody's arms apart and get them behind their back. So if anybody would like to try, we are willing to do that. Okay, so right now, physical control tactics the officers are trying to use is they're trying to pull his arms behind his back, they're trying to apply handcuffs, and they're trying to put him down on the ground. Putting somebody on the ground is just very simple. It's a lot harder to fight and run when you're laying on the ground. It's harder to throw a punch, it's harder to pull free and run away when you're on the ground. The reason I use this picture again is because I've also heard earlier is that the officer had his arm around his neck and was applying a chokehold. And so in this particular case, look at where the arm is. It's very high up here on the shoulder. It's coming down and you can barely see the left hand reaching around like this, and you can kind of tell it's coming up, that it's not down, you can see how the hand is held, and he's trying to pull him down to the ground. Turn him around, I'm not on his neck at all. So his arm up here, kind of looks like it's by the neck. He's trying to pull him down to the ground this way. So it's definitely not a chokehold or choke. As they get to the ground, you kind of see the subject's arms come apart, the officer's arms come apart. That's where they're kind of bouncing when they hit the ground. You can see by the officer's left hand, it's around the left shoulder of the subject, not up around the neck area or anything where they would be trying to choke him. In that case, his arm is down here, and it's just kind of bouncing free. As he goes to grab him again, now that one, okay, well, as he grabbing him around the neck, again, it does not look particularly good. But again, if you look at the specifics of it, you can see the right elbow is kind of up over the top of the shoulder. This hand, you can see it coming around the outside of the shoulder. If you look at the orange shirt, he's grabbing him in here. And the subject is pulling forward, so his neck comes down, or his chin comes down, where it looks more like he's on his neck. But again, there's no grabbing of the neck in there. Okay, this photo is very kind of difficult to see what it is. This is the subject's orange shirt. This is that officer behind him with his elbow up here, the arm coming down. This is the subject grabbing his arms back together around his side. So he's holding himself back like this. Again, you can see the officer now is across his chest, again, not around his neck when he goes back and he grabs him. Okay, we'll point out everything, try to be open here. This officer is the one in front of him. This is his arm and that's his hand. He is reaching down and pushing on the side of the subject's head and holding his head down. Okay. Why is he doing that? Well, several reasons. You can see the officer behind him. His face is right behind that gentleman's head. Concern would be to get headbutted. Okay. Secondly, his arm is right in front of him. I have been bit in life. Not something that you generally expect, but I got bit. I have a scar on my arm. Somebody biting me during a physical confrontation. And it also helps pin him down. So holding somebody's head down, there's no punching, there's no strikes to that head. It's simply holding him down so he can't use it to swing it back into an officer, to bite somebody, and it does help control. All right, while they're on the ground, again, there took about 25 seconds from the beginning of the incident when they went hands-on for it to go down to the ground. Okay, approximately 6 more seconds elapsed. Most of that footage that I had was from Officer Armstrong's body camera. His camera becomes dislodged and does not capture the remainder of the incident. 5 seconds later, you hear a voice say, relatively calm, "I've got this arm." Now again, it's calm for a small struggle, but he's not yelling or screaming. It's relatively subdued for what it is. Okay, same thing. Officers talk relatively calmly. They're telling him to roll over. Roll over. Okay. If they're telling him to roll over, that's probably an indication that he's not on his stomach at this point. Otherwise, they would be able to handcuff him with his hands behind his back and end the incident. That occurs for about 13 seconds. You can see by the photo, I would just go that the resistance is somewhat limited at this point. It's him holding his arms together and the officer's trying to pull them apart. You can see the officer by his legs is almost straight up and erect. So there's not a lot of bracing. There's not a lot of grabbing in and fighting. The other officers are kind of just bent over, appear to be pulling at his arms. You can see where they are in relation to the wall. The head is kind of towards the wall. They're relatively close to it. All right. After about 24 seconds, which are the time frames add up to, the subject's verbal language changes. He begins to yell, there is profanity, and his verbal resistance kind of steps up a little bit. You can see now they're starting to move around some. So at this time, our resistance all the way up till now has started with clenched fists. He pulled his arms from behind his back in front of him, clasped and grabbed his own arms to keep them being pulled behind him and handcuffed. Used his leg muscles to resist a takedown. Overall tensing of the body muscles. Like I said, you can see him kind of trying to lean forward and roll up when he was on the ground. Now his verbal hostility is starting to increase. He still has the loose handcuff hanging off his hand. His hands are down. He's kind of on his left side. His hands are down by the left side of his body, kind of underneath him, and by his waistband. Like we said, this is not about guns. This gentleman was wearing kind of jogging shorts, a t-shirt, he went to field sobriety exercises. Nobody has indicated they thought he was armed with a firearm. But we don't like waistbands because people do hide things there. I'm not saying there was one in this instance. We did not find one after the fact. But as an officer in an incident, until somebody is searched, that is something in the back of your mind that you are concerned about. Okay, the reason I show that is, let's actually go back to this picture. You can see the officer at the bottom. You can see his left arm coming up. Okay, what he's going to do is deliver a strike and then try to get a second strike to the buttocks area, back thigh area of the general ground to try to get compliance. You kind of can see that's the arm. Oops, sorry. Clicker is smarter than the presenter. All right, that's the arm right there kind of up. That's the arm kind of coming down. All right. This is something that you will see. I joke, I have two 13-year-olds at the house, and they think it's funny to walk by dad in the hallway and go, boom, and try to Charlie horse me and give me a little knee to the leg. Is that a good one, Dad? Was that funny? That's not to really minimize it. That's kind of what the effect you're looking for if you get a close fist strike in some of your response resistance encounter of this nature. If you strike in a large muscle and it kind of can lock it up for a minute or get them to go, ooh, and get that result where they let go, or it can even be as simple as a distraction technique. Somebody's, we used to joke 20 some odd years ago, police officers delivered what were called Gerber slaps. And it was when you actually went to somebody's back of the head. It was not intended to hurt it, it was intended for them to go, huh? And people would grab their arms and handcuff them. That is not a technique we use now, but this kind of has the same, it's almost a distractionary technique. And it never looks good when somebody hits somebody. But hitting somebody in a large muscle, such as their buttock, the back of their latissimus dorsi muscle, the back of the shoulder when their hands are up under them and you're trying to pull them loose, it's not going to cause a whole lot of injury. You're hitting somebody in a muscle with a punch. Okay. So when we look at that, was that justified? Is the officer allowed to hit somebody? Well, we know that for physical control tactics, the very bottom there says we use various striking techniques. So it can be something that is used based on the type of resistance we have, and the likely struggle with that much active resistance so far. I would say yes. Minor strike or two to a large muscle to try to get compliance and end the encounter is justified. Okay, what is the subject's reaction when he gets struck? You hit me. His hands did not come out from under him. His hands didn't go behind his back. He didn't give up. What did the officer do? These didn't work. So I'm not going to keep doing it. He didn't keep wailing away on the person. He didn't keep hitting them. He realized I didn't get the reaction I wanted. I need to stop. As you see from the photo about this time, the pilot slid away from the wall a little bit. The officer at top, his leg is coming out farther. This officer's leg's coming out farther. Physically, you start looking at the body movements and you know something is changing with that resistance, making the officer's reaction change.
Is he on his stomach or his back?
He's on his side.
Okay.
He's still on his left side, like when he fell and was curled on his left side. Okay. All right, so at this point, they're still struggling with him. You can see two officers go to get batons out. The female officer up here is pulling her baton out, and then the officer at the bottom is pulling his baton out. Batons can be used to help pry people's arms out from under when they're holding their hands together. You slide it in the crook of an arm and just kind of lever it out. And that way it's simple mechanics, right? A lever, something as a lever is stronger and easier to use than just trying to pick it up or grab it in and of itself. They can't get his arms out. Really not any type of force being used, but it's a technique that's a little bit stronger, and the officers are getting batons out to try to do something such as that. You can see at the bottom one, that baton is not extended. It's not held out in a striking position. He's kind of got it held down from his hand and hasn't implemented anything with it yet. And then you hear the officer yell, "Let go of me, quit grabbing me." So what has changed? The resistance level is now changing. We have gone from active resistance to aggressive resistance. Is it a relatively minor form of aggressive resistance? Yes, it is. Okay. The officer got grabbed. You can read right there what aggressive resistance, it's assaultive or attacking. It could present a threat of physical harm, but it's not likely to cause any type of serious injury. The officer that is grabbed is looking hard to see. Here's his feet over here. Here's his legs, his butt, and he's kind of leaning over the subject. That's the officer right there. He is wearing an external vest. See, as the subject was leaning down, he ended up reaching up, grabbing the officer by the side of the vest. And I'm not going to pull it around, but you can see we're like turtles in this vest.
So the other board members can see. Thank you.
Officers are, these vests are strapped on, so all their gear stays on, so the vests stay on. And they're kind of controlled by the movement. So if I'm lying on the ground and I want to pull her down there and start hitting her, I want to control her by the vest. This to me isn't aggressive. As an officer, that would be considered aggressive. Why are you grabbing my vest where you can yank me around? Why are you trying to pull on my vest? Okay. As you can see, based on all the officers' movement, unless we have a really great choreographed dance, you can see based on their body language that something has changed. His leg is even farther out. The officer that was kneeling over here, that's his head now over here, where he's basically on all fours across the subject after he got grabbed by the vest and pulled. So he's no longer kneeling upright. He is all the way over across him. The officer up top's leg is all the way out because he's bracing against something. And again, you can see how far away from the wall that entire pile is kind of slid out. That is when the officer stands up and pulls out his baton. I said, okay, based on this resistance, what changed? Why did the officer pull out that baton? I've had somebody before say because he was angry. All right, well, let's look at that. Let's make sure the officer wasn't angry when he pulled out his baton and that he just didn't lose it over this resistance and decide he's going to hit somebody. So we look at several things. If somebody gets angry enough, they're just going to lose it and respond with a physical response. Generally, how do they do it? They've lost control and they just respond. In this case, the officer wasn't, we saw he had a baton that wasn't extended in his hand. He was down on the subject. He didn't just take that baton in his hand and start just hammering away. He didn't start hammering away with both hands. He didn't start screaming or yelling profanities or anything else. Okay. What did he do? He stood up, he extended the baton, he delivered a strike, pulled it back, and you see there's a very quick pause. Okay. It's not a very lengthy pause. We're not holding the baton up in the air for 30 seconds. Okay. It was a strike, hold the baton up, strike, hold the baton up, strike, hold the baton up, and if you watch, a fourth one almost starts, and then it stops. During that time, the officer is yelling very loudly, stop resisting, stop resisting. So we know he says stop resisting. We know he stood up and extended his baton. And I would tell you that very quick and a little pause there, a partial second, was him reevaluating. Did we get compliance? Nope, nope, nope. Oh, yes, we did. So he stops that fourth strike. And you notice he did not make that fourth strike with the baton. So we saw the officer stand up. We see the other officers all moving around. We see the one officer that kind of goes to all fours and almost falls over the subject. And all of that, in and of itself, I wouldn't have to have the officers tell me if I'm trying to look at this objectively and just watching the video. When I see all those body movements occur all at the same time, that indicates to me that something has changed, that resistance has moved up enough that all these officers' bodies move like this for a reason. So then we get into, is if he's providing aggressive resistance, is striking somebody with a baton objectively reasonable? It depends, doesn't it? I'm not going to give our officers carte blanche to just hit people with a baton every time they think it's justified. We have to look at it. So we look, where were the strikes delivered? To a large muscle in the thigh. Back to the same equivalent of my kids trying to Charlie horse me. Again, not make light of it because the baton is not a comfortable thing to hit with, but you hit a large muscle. And that gives you that lockup or that little Charlie horse, which goes, ow, that hurts. Okay? What is your kind of pain response there? The hands come apart. You're not thinking about holding your hands together and resisting. That gives you your response that you want to get from the bad guy to stop his resistance. Okay? That is where we train to hit, to the large muscle groups. We also know that while it might bruise somebody, not as bad as hitting in the head with a baton, is it? You get somebody in the head with a baton, you're going to cause some serious damage. We did not see him go try to hit him in the head. We didn't see him specifically look at a bony area. I would rather get hit in my thigh with a baton than get hit in the ankle bone or the wrist bone. So we didn't get hit in a small bony area where you're going to cause some serious damage. We didn't hit in the torso or in the back where there's organs and spines or anything else. But let's look at it a little bit farther. How were the strikes delivered? Very clearly, they were delivered as swings, which is how you're trained to use the baton and strike with it. Not as jabs. You have a baton to start jabbing them into somebody's ribs or somebody's gut. Obviously, that would be a much higher level of force application. Again, they were not hammer strikes. You didn't take a baton that wasn't extended and take that little round end of it, smack it down onto somebody, which again would be probably much more violent than a smack with it. You get somebody with that baton, you're hitting them with several inches at the end, smacking along a thigh. And again, it is a force application. It hurts and it does not look pretty. I think everybody can agree the optics of somebody having to use a baton do not look pretty. But it was reasonable based on the facts and circumstances of this particular incident, and it was within policy. Okay. Does the resistance level change again? I don't have to talk to the officers. I could just look at that picture and tell you the resistance level has changed, because what the officers are doing now. The one whose leg was fully extended is now back up on the knee, and his leg is just sticking out because he's kneeling back up by the subject. The officer that was falling over him has now got his butt back over his heels and is kneeling on this side of him. His torso's up here. He's not over here on all fours. The officer that was using the baton, after he did not deliver the fourth strike, he stopped, brought it to his knee, actually leans down and is looking in to see what kind of resistance we have at that particular point. When he sees no more resistance, he doesn't offer any more strikes or it doesn't respond anymore. So what did all these officers do? They de-escalated like they were supposed to. The resistance stopped, their response stopped. This is when the subject was put into handcuffs. Something we know about response to resistance is the longer the encounters go, the more force has to be used to end it. The quicker they're over, the less likely it is the suspect gets hurt, the less likely it is that the officers get hurt. Okay. As I said, I'm sure a baton to the leg did not feel good in the situation. This gentleman was able to stand up and walk to a police car. He had no visible injuries, and I know people have said that his head was injured. This is him being put in the patrol car. He has no injuries to his forehead. Those injuries come later when he bangs his head on the divider in the car. So those are self-inflicted after the response to resistance. They did not come from this use of force. And he actually declined medical attention. They called for medical attention, they called for EMS, and he declined medical attention. This gentleman is the Assistant Commissioner of Law Enforcement for the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, and this is what he has to say about physical confrontations. It's basically that when officers try to do something that's optically friendly, so they don't get judged, and they don't use the appropriate response, that the encounter progresses and gets worse, and then we end up with a shooting or some other real bad use of force that could have been prevented if the officers were able to stop it up front. All right, as we just addressed, some of the public concerns were that the subject was injured up front. That's him going into the car. That was real hard to see, but that's where he has the mark on his forehead. Resistance only started after handcuffs were applied. Go back to that one. You can see the other officer with the left hand has not put on a handcuff yet. These handcuffs never got applied.
I'll just wait.
That was real hard to see. That's the officer on the left actually grabbing at his wrist and there's no handcuffs.
What?
So the resistance and the pulling all began before the
I know why you're
handcuffs
so
were
mad.
applied. Some say the officers specifically turned off their cameras. You can see one with a red circle laying on the ground right there. It was knocked off before the takedown was ever completed. There's one laying on the ground during the scuffle. So they were clearly, and we all saw the officers after the fact pick them up off the ground where they were knocked down. So in conclusion, I would say that the officers had lawful authority over this individual, that he resisted their lawful authority with active and aggressive resistance. The response was objectively reasonable when they used physical control tactics initially. It was quite some time before they actually went to an impact weapon. It was used very quickly in a very small kind of time frame, and the resistance escalated to aggressive, and the subject had the officer's vest, When that resistance stopped and he began giving up, he immediately stopped using the impact weapon. So the officers de-escalated like they should. That would be it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Well, as much as we earlier offered to switch the presentation, give folks an opportunity to see this before they made their public request, there were some questions that came out of the audience, and honestly, I didn't want to ignore people. I don't think that would have been open enough of us and respectful enough of us as a board to ignore questions from the audience, even though they had questions after their presentation. Some of the questions I think were just a couple. I'm gonna read the ones that I have, and then I'm gonna turn it over to the ombudsman to address a couple. I think some of them are language. I guess your colorful presentation sparked the questions. I'll let you explain that.
Yes, sir.
This particular question was about waistbands. And if you guys don't like waistbands, I mean, I heard you make a comment.
Yes, sir.
I'll let you clarify that.
That's simply, again, when somebody is on the ground, whether in this incident, where their hands are down by the side, or if they're actually on their stomach with their hands up underneath them. Waistbands are the most common place for any type of weapon that we find. So if we have not searched the subject, that is just a concern. Am I saying that everybody always has a weapon? No. If we're concerned about somebody's hands down by their waistband, that is something that's in our minds. It is a concern during that incident. But whatever we do as a response still has to be objectively reasonable to what that person's doing. If I ask somebody, can I see your driver's license? And they reach back to their pocket to get it out, I can say, oh my gosh, you're reaching for your waistband, and react inappropriately because I've asked them to get something out of there. So it kind of depends on the individual facts and circumstances of the case, but it is something that's always in our minds that if somebody's hands are down by their waistband, that there is potential to access some type of weapon.
Thank you. The other portion of this particular question was, and I think you kind of hit on that with the football analogy, so I'm going to get let you explain your colorful language that I think is sparked this particular question. What is reasonably objective response for someone surrounded by 3 or more police officers or 3 or more people taking them to the ground? This is reasonable objective response.
And again, they're all situationally dependent. You know, if there's 3 officers around somebody and that person is 6'8", largely muzzled, and is a black belt in karate, then the reasonable response may be a lot different than it was in this circumstance, where that type of resistance wasn't being offered. Is it reasonable? Like I said, with people on the ground, you can't run very well if you're on the ground. It's harder to throw a punch. You'll see in mixed martial arts or something, that is a tactic that a lot of people use, is to put somebody on the ground, because that is a position of disadvantage for the person who is taken down to the ground. It's easier to try to get people rolled over. It's easier to try to apply handcuffs than if they're standing and can use their legs and all their body to tense and pull against you. So we like to put people on the ground if they are resisting. If somebody's not resisting, are we going to walk up and say, lay on the ground, we're going to handcuff you? No. If somebody doesn't provide any resistance and we can put handcuffs on when they're standing up, then that's what's going to happen.
Another question that came out of this, and I'm assuming this question, but I don't want to assume. This question's asked, and I'll just read it. Why did the officers, and I've heard this, so I may not have been the only person who heard this about this ambush person. I guess this is a response to how you came in contact with the individual. I don't know, but that's the question.
I think they're talking about how when they decided to make the arrest, that instead of standing directly in front of them and saying, sir, you're under arrest, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. They basically told them to turn this way, and they both went up to him and grabbed him, and about the time they put their hands on him, they told him that he was under arrest for DUI. I said that is a relatively common tactic for people that are under the influence or for DUIs, because a lot of people that are under the influence, you can kind of see even in this video, the kind of up and down with how the person is acting, kind of how the behavior they're exhibiting. So in an effort to inhibit a resistance, officers will sometimes kind of grab him. You can see in this case, it wasn't like they didn't bum rush him, they didn't tackle him, they didn't snatch his arms up and they kind of came up, laid hands on and grabbed him and said, you're under arrest for DUI. And that was and I hoped not to have any resistance. So it is something that officers use where sometimes they'll go hands-on as they're telling the person they're under arrest, instead of telling the person before they do it. And it really depends on the situation. In this case, the officers felt that it would be better to go hands-on at the same time they were involved.
Thank you. This other question, this is for the board, but this question was answered really by our ombudsman stating what our position was as a board. And I'm gonna.
The question is for the board. If TPD get to present their version of what happened, will you all be hearing from the victim? Seems biased. I think this goes to the idea that this isn't for us to judge the situation. It's look at the policies that were governing that situation and were the policies adequate to guide and control the officer's actions, and do those policies reflect community values, what we want from our police department from a policy standpoint. It's not a debate back and forth on the incident itself. So that'll be my take on the response to that question, but that's a question to the board from a citizen.
That's an open question for us, so if anybody else wanted to chime in.
Is that person still here? Some clarity on what, I just offering to do a presentation? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure who the question came from, honestly.
This is my question, and I guess what I'm saying is that, so the thing about policy, right, and I'm not a policy maker, but I've done research into policy, is that it can be interpreted in different ways, right? And like policy can be applied in different ways, some that could be considered bias. So when TPD, the people who are in question for possibly violating a policy, gives a presentation on their opinion of what policy is and what happened and whether or not policy was dictated properly, that seems like that could be a little biased. I think that there should be, in order for you guys to have a full understanding of what could have happened, and I don't think I have the authority to do it personally, but you know, there are people who have also well-researched the videotapes and looked at TPD policy who have a different opinion on whether or not the policy was violated or whether or not the actions adhered to policy. And so I just think that it's a little, and it's not your guys' fault or anything, but I just think it's a little disingenuous, and it doesn't allow you guys to make a full decision if TPD is the only people who get to give a Banty Spanchi presentation. If need be, I will create a presentation for the next meeting and present it to you guys. Like, that is something that needs to happen, or someone who is smarter and better than me could do that as well. But I think there should be given an opportunity for citizens or for the defendant, the victim, or for their legal team to be able to present their opinion on whether or not it is a peace policy. Thank you.
Does he want to present, and does he want to come talk to the board?
I have no idea. I have not communicated personally with the victim, but I know people who may know, and I can find out.
So my question would be, if we're gonna let facts lead us and guide us, what do you think in that presentation was up for factual dispute?
Well, a lot, actually. So I think for one, I think if we just start off at the very beginning of the presentation, in which the officer was speaking about how in order to stop someone, you have to have a reasonable belief. And now my follow-up question to that would be, what exactly does policy dictate is reasonable? Because what seems to be the issue is if we are relying on one person's belief of what is reasonable, we cannot, because people are human beings, take away biases from that. And so in order for policy to be just, policy needs to make it as easy as possible for biases to not affect the way a person makes a decision. And so the way that I view what is reasonable may be different than the way someone else views what is reasonable. I am a teacher, and so the way that I view a child's bad behavior has a lot more to do with my parenting style than the way another teacher might view child's bad behavior, right? Because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in corporal punishments. The way that I would run my classroom is very different in the way that I would respond to a threat or to something that is wrong. It's very different than the way another teacher with a different set of beliefs and biases, because I have my own, would behave. And so we can't say that things are within policy if policy is up to the user.
Okay, well, let me just go back to the crux of the question. This board is open. Any citizen has a right to come to this board. We haven't prohibited anyone. That's not our standard. No one is prohibited, no citizen is prohibited from coming to the board with whatever they want to present to us. We've had things presented to us before that didn't fall within our purview, and we couldn't touch them. But if someone comes, anyone wanted to bring a situation to the board with respect to policy and how that policy is enacted, then of course we can look at policy. We're not telling anyone that they don't have the opportunity to do that. This board is open to the citizens of Tallahassee.
Okay, well then I would like to make a presentation or create a slot for someone to make a presentation about the policy of TPD's use of force policy, active resistance policy, and passive resistance policy, and whether or not this case in particular, whether or not policy was followed in those instances. And I would like to create a time slot for the next meeting in order to be able to do that.
Okay. Dr. Bowen?
I do hear what you say, and I try to be respectful of that. I guess I'm thinking about the board and what we do look at. I'm thinking more in terms of that could have been probably 3 more police officers that would have handled that totally differently. It's just a matter of whatever those officers are taken to that particular incident. That's my concern. I think that if I had seen him do a presentation to a young man who was in this, I haven't watched the video for reasons not wanting to watch it. But I'm thinking that if I'd seen, I don't know if I would have felt different seeing slide by slide or seeing the video take place. I don't know if I would have felt differently seeing the video over the slides. However, I think that it's not so much that issue as it is the policy. And he tried to attempt the policy and just went through it. I have in front of me all of the different pieces of everything that you're saying, each policy. I think as a board, what would be probably better within our time to look at each one of these and address these from a board standpoint as to what does this mean and how can we address this differently, and how can the police office, how can the law enforcement look at it differently. I don't think someone coming to show me an example would change my thought process on how I look at the policy, because the policy is going to be the policy. It's how individuals react to that and what's going to happen when a person is stopped and how the incident is handled by the different people. I do have some other questions, but I'll get to that. But that's, I hope what I'm saying.
I understand. I
get
agree.
to the point without us having to have, because I don't want every person that's stopped by law enforcement to come before the board and start telling us, because we know what the problems are, if they're problems. We need to look at what the policies are and what the rules are and start addressing those, more so than looking at each incident, to look at what the policy, because the incidents are not the individual. The incidents are the policies that we use to arrest people.
But we do need to look at the way that policy is able to be used by individuals, perhaps not like a rundown of every case, but like you were saying, there were police in that situation who did not use excessive force. I
think that will be done if we look at the policy. I think looking at the policy will help us to address each that. We can't change implicit bias and what people may feel when they're making an arrest. Everybody in adrenaline flows differently when they get into an incident. We don't know what that's going to be. It may be different for different people. But I think looking at the policy at least help us to address that issue once we look at the policy that's written that they go by.
Thank you.
Are we gonna play the video also, as opposed to just seeing the slides that we're gonna play here?
Yeah, I've got all the videos. It's up to the board what you'd like to see, how much of it.
How long does it last?
There are 4 body cam videos, and also 1 surveillance video. If you're looking at just the incident itself, post-contact, each is only about 2 minutes, probably long in total. Some of them are shorter because they go the body cam fall, there won't be anything to look at long, so there's not too much to see except to hear.
Yeah, I don't know what the board thinks, but I feel like we had a certain picture painted for the slides, and I wonder if it would be helpful to see some of the, just that incident where the slides were talked about played.
Okay, well, yes, Ms. Van Wyn.
I was gonna ask if we were gonna be able to view the videos. I think that would be helpful. I have intentionally not viewed videos because I read in the paper that this matter was being referred to us, and I thought it would be helpful to view them in the context, and I'll see the entire video. But to get at this question that we're kind of scrambling with here, I think I'd like some clarification. Hopefully, Deputy Chief Larson can help us with this. The reason I know this was being referred to the board was from the newspaper. The TPDs referred this incident to us for review. Can you tell us, or is there something in writing that tells us what the TPD wants us to do? Do they want us to determine whether the policies are followed? Do they want us to determine whether the policies should be changed based on what we're seeing? I mean, make a recommendation, of course. So, you know, we've got staff telling us we don't have the authority to review, conduct an investigation, and I understand that. We're not going to call officers for us and ask them questions. So what is it that TPD wants this board to do? What kind of feedback are they looking for us?
From my understanding, I believe the city of Tallahassee wants the board to look at this as you are independent of us. One of the reasons I didn't show you pieces of the video or parts of the video is that I have all of it. You tell me what you want to see, we can slow it down, we can speed it up, we can go through different parts of it, we can look at it again. So I'm taking direction from you in reference to what it is. I don't want to, again, you know, the presentation is because I asked for a use force expert to make sure that there was some understanding of the utilization of force that occurred and what are some of the underlying legal principles behind that. But as far as the video itself, yes, we can watch any pieces and parts as long as you'd like to watch as a board. As far as what TPD is looking for, again, as a board, individual officers' actions, that is up to Internal Affairs to review. If there is an excessive force complaint, or that is for that purview to the officers. And so that's not really what the board would look at from TPD's perspective. But again, what type of policing does a community want? And I think that that's what we're trying to get. What input in policy where it says active, aggressive, what can change? If you don't like what was seen and you think that it is too, it was a minimal amount and we should use a baton for a minimal amount of resistance, aggressive resistance, then how do we get to a point where you're training or policy control that we can affect change there? I think that's what we're looking for from the board, just an understanding of what is it that is here. Is this okay? Is there an understanding? Because what happens in the media quite often is there is some portrayal of it. I've seen different articles where it says TPD said, you know, they use passive resistance, and that's not what we said. It was active, and we did that. But those articles kind of misconstrue what happened. And so really, it's to view the actual videos, make your own judgments of it, look at the policies, look at other policies. You can request me to look for other sample policies from across the country, or come up with wording or something to control it if you don't like what happened. That's really what my understanding is of the.
I'm sorry, just to follow up. So, Mr. Sutton, is there anything that came from the city in writing to refer this to the board?
There was not. It was just a request for the board to review it at that high of a level.
And let me ask a question in direct reference to that. Previously, in the other cases we all went through, they were active cases and we were not to look at active cases. And I'm just wondering why this case, isn't this case still active?
It is not. The
It's
TPD
over.
And Ombudsman, please correct me if I misspeak, but TPD reviewed it, made a decision that it did not need to be referred to internal affairs for review, and passed their judgment that it was within policy, and therefore it was available for our consideration. But if the chief had decided he felt like it needed an internal affairs investigation, it would not be within our jurisdiction until that investigation is resolved.
TPD can,
So, Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. Go ahead and let him know how many
Is it typical that a DUI, resistance to response issue, which relates to some other similar circumstance, how that would be looked at and viewed by the internal affairs unit? Do they look at all of these types of responses typically to determine exactly what you understand at a high level has been determined at the police department?
So if I understand the question. Yes, the officers will write a response resistance report and write a report. The supervisor of that officer or those officers will review those. Then the lieutenant of that officer or those officers will review it. If there's injury to the subject during the use of force, that will go higher up to a major level, and also the legal advisor. And then ultimately, the internal affairs unit looks at all of those cases.
So, with all of that information, has that all been completed with this particular Kirkland situation?
It has. It has gone up to the sergeant, the lieutenant, and then over to internal affairs.
So when we're looking at the policy and procedure, should we be looking at a broader circumstance other than this particular incident specifically? But I know that this is why we're looking at the policy, but you know, if the policy is gonna actually take any kind of shape, we should be looking at the comparable types of cases that are out there like this. Are there, if internal affairs looks at DUI cases where there was reasonable use of the low-level tactics to get response from an individual, is there a situation where a person could understand what types of low-level force instances are there in what instances did occur where, how many instances of this level of response where it required a report made that was reviewed by the internal affairs team? How many of those types of cases are available to us for us to be able to look at in the context of looking at this particular incident?
I don't know the answer to that as far as, obviously the specifics of the crime that occurred or is alleged to have occurred. In reference to the time utilization or physical force used, I'm sure I could find you numbers and bring that back to the board if that's, you're looking for cases to read through where batons were utilized. I don't know. Sergeant Fula, Officer Cody.
Yes, sir, we can easily get the numbers. Off the top of my head, I believe last year there were 11 uses of the baton. But those numbers are tracked and we keep them like that.
Okay, let's do this in the interest of, we're gonna hold right now, and we're gonna take a 5-minute recess. Everybody take a break. And let me say one other thing too. We're gonna have to limit questions back to the review. That was the reason for us trying to give people ample time to ask questions, but some of the questions are getting repetitive, and we're just gonna have to cut it off at some point. So I've got one other, the chief has a couple that he's gonna incorporate into some of the things that he's gonna be saying. We'll address those, and anything else that you want to present to the board, I would suggest that you write that down and leave it with us, and hopefully we can get those things addressed for you. Let's take a 5-minute break, and let's be back at what? It's critical we do that. So what's going on part of the video, we want to see, so yeah, try to turn it back over to him. And then want to see if there's that, unless there are any more questions on the day.
Me, one of my questions is for the the officers that were involved in this situation, do they have a history of like any type of citizen complaints?
I do not know, I can find out.
Okay. Is it my other
Just one thought is that that's kind of, it's balancing on that line of investigating the officers or not.
Oh, no. No, it goes in the line of what we talked about where we place on rudeness or how, this kind of situation. So just to see, because because that's something we did say that all kinds of correlation, maybe certain incidents that happen. Yeah, no. My other question was, as far as the big situation, could that be kind of different for possibility when he was being required to give until they had, possibly a citation to obtain court for years? Okay.
There's other issues park car on side, take on the incident of sitting, he comes back, his car drives, and his car goes. Somebody gets hit. Like I know in general, we're not, I think it's the policy. I don't have to go to your side groups or else if you get called, they usually lie or say, damn, I'm back. Yes, there's a general order 6 which is arrests on printed buildings, which covers when we can issue those to peers in different avenues, so citations, those kind of things, different crimes, but the UI is not. So, if someone is pulled over and there's an idea that they've been drinking, but it's either there's a shooting over here or an officer needs to solve this quickly, is that case again? MSCs and the investigation of that case again, 2 officers for 20, 30 minutes investigating this. Taking some time, yeah, there could be a possibility for that, but not usually after MSCs fail the arrest will occur.
I just wondered that it would be interesting to look at when CUIs occur, maybe the time that they have been brought to the field.
So the board would like, I don't know, request to watch videos. I don't know which video you'd like to watch first. The primary NSC officer, Officer Portway, is completing the sorry, I just trying to get videos. I just don't watch all of that. Watch part of it, watch physical interaction occurs. You could use body camera, really something. Right.
In its entirety, it's like 45 minutes, just to give you a heads up. You want to watch the entire video from beginning to end. Just consideration.
The physical interaction after the field sobriety exercises. And really what I think as far as the incident, if we're looking at the response to resistance portion of it, that is pretty much over in each video after about 3 minutes total for each video.
I'd like to see how it got started, that's what I'd like to see. Tell me this, as soon as he was DDOI.
We can go to the video that's labeled Northway.
So are we watching the beginning and then?
Oh, we can watch the very beginning and then we can go to the portion. This is where Officer Northway pulls up on scene at an listed. You know, audio for the first 30 seconds or so. Because when the officer turns the body camera on, there's a 30-second loop that's running. See, I don't think that we just leave. 30 seconds.
Where's this located?
It's high in Tennessee.
I pulled up, turned left, someone banged on his window, I thought it was a bug. And I was here, somebody's like, no, he's asleep. Over, yeah, he's passed out. Parked my car there, get out, bang on the window, he finally comes through, opens the door, and he wakes up. And then he can barely stand up.
Okay.
And there's 31 that's doing the car.
Okay. What's his name?
He gave it to Armstrong, not like me.
Okay.
I made him do that in the car.
Oh, okay.
What's your address on this?
I'll stay living like this, living really not too long
Okay, what's wrong with 1481 Kingsford Avenue? 1481 Kingsford Avenue? Yes. You know who Hulk is? No. Old man who's ginormous, big motherfucker. Yes, you don't. Is Kingsford Avenue in Tallahassee? Okay, alright, cool. Y'all wanna surround a nigga like he's selling drugs or something? I'm just sitting around, okay, I probably fell asleep at the light, but damn. Okay. Is it really necessary for all y'all to be out here? Like, damn.
Well, what?
Y'all could have told me, okay, well, you need to go home for the night or something's wrong, but damn, y'all gotta surround a nigga in front of his fucking car, like, damn. Is it that serious?
Hold on now.
You got a car behind me, a car in front of me? Come on, man.
Right. Do you understand?
I pay my taxes just like the next person. Come on, man. It's not that fucking serious. Okay, if it's that serious, okay, to a point, why didn't you take my ass home? I don't think so. Fine. Okay. But damn.
The reason why
if I go to work and work my ass off every night, I work 2 fucking jobs, 3 jobs.
His name's Jarquez. We need EMS.
I fucking work my ass off.
Jarquez. Okay. Are you willing to listen to me for just a moment? Okay. Listen.
I'm saying, y'all got a nigga embarrassed out here in the middle of nowhere.
Well, why don't we go over there and talk, and that way
I mean,
nobody's going to be
you
on
might
the
as
side
well
of the
say
road.
what you got to say because everybody out here see what's doing
Okay.
anyway.
Well, listen. I was called because
I just
there's
came from the
concern.
fucking pool. I'm wet as fuck.
Okay, and there's concern that you may have had too much to drink tonight.
Okay, that's fine.
So I'm here to conduct a DUI investigation.
Okay.
Okay. So can we go over there and talk?
What's the difference? You already done put me in
Because there's traffic here, and I don't really want to talk here.
Shit.
Okay.
What's the difference? Y'all didn't want to talk about it
You got your card on you real quick?
Pretty sure you probably done went in my car illegally and went and got my shit.
Who did? No, you.
Okay.
I walked
It
from
wasn't
there
in my
over here.
pocket when I went in there, so I mean, for them to get it illegally.
What? The Miranda warning? This is not your ID, okay? This is me going to inform you what your rights are, okay? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while you're being questioned. If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, want to be appointed to represent you before any questioning,
arrest me,
if you
bro?
wish. And you can decide at any time to exercise his rights and not answer any questions. Nope.
Y'all gonna fucking arrest me.
I'm simply trying to do an investigation.
What's the investigation difference apparent to a correct
Because
arrest?
if I was going to arrest you, I'd put you in handcuffs right now. And I'm trying to treat you like a very reasonable man, and I'm not putting you in handcuffs because I'm not ready to arrest you because I don't know. Okay? I'm trying to do an investigation. That's fair to you, right? Okay.
I've been through a lot.
So, and I can appreciate that. So, and you can decide at any time to exercise his rights and not answer any questions and make any statements. Do you understand each of these rights I've explained to you? Is that a yes? You do understand?
Yeah, I don't understand.
Okay. And have you previously requested any law enforcement officer to allow you to speak to an attorney? Did you ask these guys for an attorney? Okay. Having these rights in mind, you wish to talk to me now. You want to tell me what's going on? You say you're going through a lot. So you're coming through a pool. Did something happen at the pool today or what?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a family picnic, okay? Back a little bit. I'm just trying to go to work. Yes, my clothes is at home. Trying to get them, go to work.
Okay.
Other than that,
Which Whataburger do you work at?
Lake Bradford.
Okay. Okay. So you had a little bit to drink.
Yes.
Okay. And how old are you?
26.
Not against the law to have something to drink, especially at a pool party. It was a beautiful day, right? Okay.
Yes.
It is against the law to have too much to drink and try and drive.
Right.
Okay? That's the concern here. Okay? So, I'm here to ask if you'll participate in some field sobriety exercises. Are you willing to do that? Yes or no? Okay. But we are going to go over there because this is not a good place to be. All right? And I'm trying to give you every opportunity to show me that you're not impaired.
I'm not.
Okay. And that's why I'm asking you. I mean, they're completely voluntary. Okay? So you don't have to, you can tell me, nope, I don't want to participate. Okay? If you do, I am required to tell you that I'll have to make a decision based on what I see. Okay? And my observations so far. So, like I said, this is your opportunity to dispel this fear that you are impaired and trying to drive. Okay? Because that's not a good place to be. That's not safe for you. That's not a good place for your family if we have to work around.
Okay, what's the difference between you just giving me a ticket? Okay, I can go home and.
Because that's not how DUI works.
Okay, but I've never. If y'all look at my record, I've never had a crash, no type of that before.
Okay.
You can see that on my record. So what's the difference?
Okay. So let's go over here and let's talk. Okay, because this is in a traffic way. I mean,
you got a car in front of me. What's the difference?
The difference is that we go over there, make sure the lighting is fine. We can talk. We can do the FSCs if you want to. You can ask me any questions that you want. Okay. We're gonna go over there. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Alright. Now, before we are they moving it? Okay. Alright. Come on over.
So you said what he was gonna do?
Yeah, we're gonna go over
You said
there.
what he was gonna do?
Huh?
You said what he was gonna do? You said arrest or
Who?
leave? I ain't got time for that. I got work in a fucking morning. I work two fucking jobs to have to go through this shit, man. Then when y'all get somebody like this, y'all expect for a person to just sit here and be easy, calm, and all this, that, and the third. Come on, man.
Okay. I'm not expecting anything but the mutual respect that I'm showing you. That's all. Okay? Alright. And I understand that you didn't get along with one or two of the officers. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So now it's just
I work a lot, man. I work from 7 a.m. to basically 6 a.m. in the afternoon. Don't get off until around 6 p.m. in the afternoon.
That's a long
And
day.
don't get off until 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning.
Can they move your car out?
Why can I move?
Because I'm investigating a DUI, remember? And until my fear is dispelled, then I can't let you get in the car right now. Okay.
I can move it as soon as you find out.
All right. Okay. So you are willing to participate?
Yes.
Okay. So let me get you to put your feet together. Okay. And I just want you to keep your arms by your side. Okay. Do you wear contacts or glasses?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you take any kind of medication?
No, ma'am. I'm ADHD.
Okay. And do you take medication for it?
No, ma'am.
You don't?
I haven't taken it in 2 years.
Okay. And can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Do you suffer from diabetes, epilepsy, or any kind of head trauma?
None of that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move this back and forth. I want you to follow it with your eyes and just your eyes alone, okay? I don't want you to move your head. All right? Move your head. Just keep your head high. Keep looking at the light. Keep looking at the light. I'm gonna go real slow, okay? Keep looking.
Yes, ma'am. I see it.
Now we're gonna go up.
I see it. Top.
Okay. I just need you to keep looking at it though. Okay. All right. Can you give me just a moment, and I'm gonna get some tape, okay? All right, here's the tape. Y'all don't have to talk or nothing.
So that's what it is. Abnormal for people to be asleep. So we pull their, so because I don't know if you're having a medical emergency. So I pull my patrol car.
I work from 7
No, I got you, but hold on, I don't
to
know you.
basically 6. I'm just telling
So,
you.
yeah.
I work from 7 a.m. to 6 a.m. Get off from work 6 p.m. Go to work at Whataburger 10 p.m. Don't get off to 7 or 6 a.m. in the morning.
I got you, but the reason we pull our patrol car in front is because if someone is having medical emergency, they're having a seizure. Because I don't know if we can get seizures or not. So I pull in front, so that way if you're in the middle of medical emergency, you take your foot off the brake, you don't roll into traffic and risk getting hurt or someone else. That's why. And then when you come
sheriff named Alvin Wright.
Roberts?
He died from having his foot on the pedal behind the wheel at a light.
Yep. I mean, that's why we do what we do.
All right, come on over here. Okay. So you can see this line?
That's right.
All right. So I'm gonna ask you to walk down this line and back, okay? But I'm gonna show you how I want it done. Are you gonna feel comfortable doing it in your
Forward
sides?
and backwards, it's no problem.
Do you feel comfortable doing it in your sides? Okay, do you have any hip, knee, or ankle injuries?
Just a lighter in my pocket.
Okay, I was just asking if you had like any prosthetic legs or anything else like that. Okay. All right, so what I'm gonna ask you to do while I'm explaining this, I want you to put your left foot on the line. Okay? On this yellow line. You're gonna put your right foot directly in front of your left foot, just like this, heel to toe. No, I don't want you to start yet. Can you go back, please? Because I want you to understand exactly what I'm asking you to do, okay? So while I'm doing that, I want you to put your left foot on the line, put your right foot directly in front of your left foot, and just stay there, okay? Heel to toe, keep your arms down by your side, okay? When I say go, I want you to take 9 heel to toe steps down the line, turn around, take 9 heel to toe steps back. This is what it's gonna look something like this. 1, 2, 3, and so on to get to 9. When you get to 9, keep that front foot planted. Take a series of small steps around and take 9 heel to toe steps back. 1, 2, 3, and so on to get to 9 again. Okay? Now why are you doing this? I want you to look at your feet. I want you to count your steps out loud. Keep your arms down by your side and don't stop until you've completed the exercise.
You say 9 steps, right?
You're going to take 9 steps, turn around, take 9 steps. All heel to toe. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions? Okay. If you don't have any questions and you understand, you can begin. Yeah, you're good to go. Do you remember what I asked you to remember about the turn? Okay. Okay. All right. Come on over. All right. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is while I'm explaining it, keep your feet together, okay, and your arms stand by your side. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to raise up one foot. I don't want you to do it yet. Don't do it yet. I want you to raise up one foot, either foot, whatever's the most comfortable for you. You're going to raise it up approximately 6 inches off the ground, point your toe out, and while you're looking at your toe, I want you to count out loud 1001, 1002, 1003, and so on until I tell you to stop, okay? keep both legs straight, keep your arms down by your side. Does that make sense? Do you feel comfortable doing in the slides?
No, but
Do you
I
want
don't
to take
have
them?
a
Do you
choice.
want to take them off? You can take them off if you want.
Honestly, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking them off.
You
That's honest, but
What?
I wouldn't feel comfortable taking them off, but I don't have no choice, so yeah.
It-
I just have to prove it to y'all, so that's fine.
Okay, whether you take them off or on, that's up to you. Just like whatever foot you raise, that's up to you too, okay?
Yeah.
I'm trying to give you every opportunity to show me that you're not impaired, okay? All right, do you understand what I've asked you to do?
Yes.
Okay, do you have any questions? Okay, so put your arms down by your side. Which foot are you gonna raise? You ready? Okay, you can begin.
What am I supposed to do?
Do you remember the instructions?
Take a step, then walk and lift my foot up.
No, I don't want you to take any steps on this one, okay? I want you to raise your foot approximately 6 inches off of the ground, point your toe out, and while you're looking at your foot, I want you to count out loud, 1001, 1002, 1003, until I tell you to stop, okay? You ready?
Yeah.
You understand what I'm asking you to do?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you can begin.
1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 1010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016.
Okay, you can stop. Okay. Brittany is a very articulate person. What's the highest grade you've completed?
I'm sorry?
What's the highest grade you've completed?
As far as what?
Like, did you graduate high school, college? College?
Going on my way to being manager at Whataburger.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Okay, hopefully that'll eliminate
I
some
just
of
had a
this.
little bit
Okay.
too much, honestly, I had a long night, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm just trying.
All right. Would it be fair to say that you know your ABCs?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for this one, what I want you to do, I want you to put your feet together, put your arms down by your side, and I'm going to ask you, don't do it yet, I'm going to ask you to tilt your head back, close your eyes, and just recite the alphabet A, B, C, D, and so on until you get to Z. Okay? I don't want you to sing it, run it, rap it, or clump any of the letters together. Just a straight recital of the letters, A to Z. Does that make sense?
Okay, you can expect for a person to really rapidly be able to say their ABCs while their eyes is closed while walking for a line.
I don't want you to walk a line. I just want you to stand right there. That's it.
Okay, that's awesome.
Okay. You're right. That wouldn't be fair at all.
Yeah, I ain't trying to follow the
No.
fence.
And I'm not going to let you. Okay. So, while you're standing there, I just want you to tilt your head back. You're going to close your eyes and just recite your ABCs, okay? You understand what I'm asking you to do? Okay. Do you have any questions for me? All right. Tilt your head back for me. And you may begin. Were you going to say your ABCs?
Oh, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. I know my ABCs.
All right. You take your left from your right.
That's me, my left and my right. I'm sorry. I apologize. We have to ask.
No.
I'm
Listen,
sorry.
they
I ain't trying to go to jail tonight. I've been keeping my. I spent 2 to 3 years trying to get my driver's license back. No. Okay.
They make me
I
ask
had
all
a
these dumb
long
questions.
night, to be honest.
What's that?
I have a long night, to be honest. Honestly, I'm just trying to make it to work.
Okay.
And go from there. If they don't want me at work, then I just go home.
Okay,
Honestly,
well,
I just ain't trying to go to jail.
Okay, this is the
I've been
last
to
one
jail
that I'm
one
asking.
time, and I honestly ain't trying to go back. I'm telling you.
Right.
I'm not trying to go back.
Okay. Okay, are you willing to do one last thing for me? I'm just asking. Yes, no?
What's that?
Okay. Your left and your right? Okay. Put your fingers out like this. And put it right back down by your side. Okay. For this one, I'm going to ask you to tilt your head back. You're going to close your eyes again. Don't get just yet. And when I call out left or right, I want you to take whatever hand I've called. You're going to take the tip of the finger, touch the tip of your nose, and put it right back down by your side without me asking you to. Does that make sense? So if I call out right, you're going to pick up the right hand.
Eyes closed.
Okay. All right, tilt your head back. Put your feet together. Left. You can put your finger down. Right. You can put your finger down. Left. You can put your finger down. Right. You can put your finger down.
I made a simple mistake with mine, but other than that, I swear to God, it's nothing like what y'all think.
Okay. Right. You can put your finger down. Left. All right. Okay. You can put your hands behind your back, please, okay?
Oh, wait a minute. Thanks. So we're going to pause on this for a second. This is where the physical touching begins on Officer Northway's video. Again, this will last a couple of minutes. As far as the field sobriety exercises, those are all detailed in the reports. And Officer Northway's report explains what was done in the FSE.
Use the microphone so everybody can hear you.
Sure. And so the reports will be given to you, along with the response to resistance and everything else, and it will detail the field sobriety exercises and what Officer Northway observed in those FSEs.
Okay, I want to finish this.
All right.
Sir, could we request that you like roll it back about 6 seconds?
No, I don't need to see a roll back. I want to see from this point forward. It's okay. This is what happened.
You're going to be arrested for DUI.
Stop resisting.
You are going to be arrested for DUI. Stop resisting.
I didn't do it. Why is all three of y'all attacking me for no reason?
Take him down.
I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything.
I got this one. I have this one. I don't have this one. Roll to your stomach. Roll to your stomach.
How? I didn't do a fucking thing.
Do it.
So you hit me? I don't do a fucking thing.
Get that other hand up.
You hit me. I didn't do a fucking thing to you.
Get off me. Quit grabbing me.
Stop resisting. Get out. Stop resisting. Give him your hands now. I can't breathe. I didn't do anything, bro.
That's him, Papa.
What the fuck did I do to y'all, bro? I just trying to go home, bro. Y'all want to hit me with a fucking damn stick? Why did you lie to me? Why is it that you lied to me, bro? Why?
Nobody lied to you.
You did lie to me.
I did not.
You told me to walk in the line and do what the fuck you say. I did. If you wanted me to get around home, I could have got around home. Why you just couldn't say that? I didn't do a damn thing. Okay, I fell asleep at a light. I worked too hard to get my mom.
Why you crying? Knock it off.
Because I fucking did 3 fucking years.
All you gotta do is
As a board,
I did. Ask this motherfucker what I did. You put me in fucking handcuffs.
Can we pause it for a minute, Deputy?
I'm sorry?
Can you pause it for a second, please?
Okay. I think the use of force part is already passed, right? At this point? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he's already restrained.
There's another video that shows what they did.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
store video. You can see what they did in the
Yeah,
other video.
I don't see it.
You can't see it here.
If that's what you're
Yeah, we're
saying.
gonna watch the
Okay.
other angles, but I think she's saying we don't need to watch the
The
whole
rest.
rest of this one.
And I want to state one more thing. At this point, there won't be any more public comment. We passed that point. So if you have any comment or any questions, just write them down and pass them. If you want to address, we'll probably table them and address them in the next meeting. Because we're going to get through this. So it's not to ignore anyone who has questions, but this is past public comment. This is for the board at this point forward.
Well, the questions that have already been submitted to you, right?
Not tonight, given the fact that we're past the public part, but we will address them. Because we're not gonna get through all of this in this meeting, so this is gonna be addressed. So the questions will be addressed.
Stop.
What I do?
You are gonna be arrested for
What I
DUI.
do?
All right.
What I do? What I do?
Stop resisting.
I didn't do anything. Why am I putting y'all back in for no reason?
Take him down. Take him down to the ground.
I didn't do anything, bro. I didn't do anything. See what I'm saying? Y'all talking to me. I didn't do anything. See what I'm saying?
I got this on.
See what I'm saying? I didn't do nothing.
I have this one.
See what I'm saying? I didn't do nothing. I didn't do nothing. You got your hands on my fucking neck, bro. How? When I didn't do a fucking thing.
That's the one that shows
You hitting me? You hitting me?
again.
I didn't do a fucking thing.
I think we just need to see the one that was showed to us in the presentation, but I don't think we need to hear Hayne again.
Okay, so it's up to
The other camera angle is what I think what they're asking for. It just shows the whole.
It's up to the board. If you guys want to see it until it's put back on, we can. If you want to just see that portion, and that's fine also.
Just see that portion, just see it, I don't wanna hear this.
You want the volume off?
Huh?
The volume off?
No, I can hear it, I mean, we're just listening to the thing that happened, I need to see the other angle you all said that was available. That's all, I wanna see that angle, and I don't mean, it seems like we're just going through the same tape, Father. Excuse me.
For no reason.
Take him down. Take him down to the ground.
I didn't do anything, bro. I didn't do anything. See what I'm saying? You're not attacking me. I didn't do anything.
So all four body cams down out there?
Crouch. Is there a question? I'm sorry. Okay.
No, I was asking, so all three, but he just told me it was 4 officers, so all 4 officers' body cams got knocked out?
There's additional footage, correct?
There's a surveillance video that overlooks the entire.
Can we see the surveillance?
Yeah, there's one more of the other, and then the surveillance.
Okay.
Gene,
Sir.
did all officers, those 3 officers, did they have their body cameras on, all 3 of them, or just 2?
They all have them on.
It's all working?
Yes, sir. What they have are magnet mounts, and I've got a couple to show the board, different mounts that are used. They go inside the shirt, rare earth magnets, and it sticks to the shirt. Coming on and off, they're pretty, but once they get pulled to the side, the magnets break and then 15, 25. This is the surveillance video from the area.
He's bending his knee back, is that, I mean, I see him bending his leg, his knee to his butt, what's happening?
They'll usually cross someone's legs just to make sure that they're not kicking, because once, if somebody were resisting and were to kick, obviously it's a lot harder once that, your legs are flexed to actually kick up.
I can't tell, is there somebody on him, is anybody on top of him while he's lying in that position on the ground?
In one of the videos later, you will see when they put the body camera back on, that one of the officers, his hands are here behind his back, and one of the officers has their knee over his elbow, kind of right in that area there, and then he's still holding his kind of his girdle down.
The minnow, at one point, you all want to stop it.
At this point, the other officers have put their body cameras back on their person. They started to retrieve them. And so if you wanted to see this portion up close, or hear what's being said, that's probably a better view.
For me, I'm good. I've seen enough of this for me. I don't know what the rest of the board members.
Does anyone need to see or do anything else before we stop this portion of it? Okay. Thank you, Deputy Chief. Does any of the board members have any questions for the Deputy Chief?
I do.
With respect to the,
My first question is, what constitutes being drunk?
wait till you get back to see.
So for a DUI, you have to be over a 0.08 blood alcohol level. During the FSEs, and the report is detailed, the field sobriety exercises, there are many things to look for. The officer doesn't just say, take 9 heel-to-toe steps, turn around, take 9 back, and they look at how well they did the heel-to-toe steps. That is true, they do that. But part of the exercises, part of the judgment of the exercises is listening to direction. And so when the officer, say, does the 9 heel-to-toe steps, put your hands by your side, put your foot in front of the other foot, and then he starts walking. Don't begin yet, hold on. Those indicators are what the officer's looking for through the FMCs. Again, taking more than 9 steps, not turning, lifting an arm up, and all that's detailed in the report as to what the officer observed that were indicators of being under the influence.
So how many tests? She gave light, line, hop, ABC, nose finger. You give all these?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a horizontal gaze nystagmus, which was the first, where you follow a pin.
Right, we follow the pin.
You had walk and turn, which is the 9 steps and 9 steps back. One leg stand, where you stand on one leg with your hands to your side. You had the Romberg alphabet, the ABCs, and then the 5th was finger to nose.
Okay. You have to give all these?
It depends if they can complete them. If it's very obvious that they're not able to complete them for whatever reason, the officer can make a determination outside of that. Again, the entirety of the event is what the officer is judging. So all of that, not just this, but the fact that the person was asleep behind the wheel, the fact that she came up and asked for a Miranda card, he thought it was his driver's license. There's a lot of things that were the officer looks at in the investigative portion of that. But again, a lot of those are detailed in the reports.
At what point do you tell a person that they're being charged? That didn't clear for me. It didn't clear from when he stopped and when the officer came up with his hand on his back. I was with the guy who was arrested. I don't know at what point I knew what was about to happen. And when he said, and the thing that gets me, what's happening now is that with the current state of affairs for black males being arrested and being stopped, I understood him. You're afraid when you see the lights, you're afraid when you see the police officers. I understand they may have been following policy, but I thought that even the things he was asked to do, I can't tell you I could have passed that just getting in my car going to the store. I can't. I'm not, and that part of the policy I would like to question later as to how long I gotta watch this light. I would lose from watching that light. I'm sick of watching that light, and you're getting frustrated because I understood his frustration, but I also understand the officer wanting to get it. I also understand the intimidation of that many police officers around you when you may feel okay, but you got to, I just did a ride along Saturday night. I rode along from 10 to 2, and it was, I know what officers go through, but I also have to understand when I see people like this young man, I think there was a point she could have said, call somebody to pick you up and go home. Could we have done that somewhere down the line? Did we have to arrest him? I mean, because I didn't think he was so far out of it. He said he was ADHD, whatever that was to him. I don't know, he was taking my medication. But at some point, can we get human and say, call somebody? And maybe that's too much to ask. But I thought that on my ride along on Saturday night, we did some great things. We didn't arrest not one, but one person all night. And we did human things with people as we stopped them. All of them were African Americans, but it was all of my officers were white, but we did things that were human. I'm just wondering, and not to put the race card on this, because I tried to put the race card, I put to deal with the issues. But my concern is that in this particular case, there are some policies I think we need to look at as to how does this work. I mean, because with the officers, I don't know when he was told you're now being charged for drunk driving. I don't recall hearing that. Did I miss it? She said it. Okay, well, maybe he didn't hear it then because he said, what am I being charged for? And maybe he felt like I walked the line, I said my ABCs, I did the nose tip, I followed the lights. I thought, and truth be told, I think if you tell me to walk not, I may walk 10. Just for the sake to show you I can do one. Well, this is no test for me. I can continue this test. You know, he finishes ABCs, now I know my ABCs, next time when you say to me, that's not to me sign of being drunk. That's a sign of what we learn as kids, and it goes to the next level of every time we say our ABCs, we continue the song. And, you know, that and just understanding how do we become human when we have to stop people and deal with this becomes my concern. And I say, yes, we do need to look at some policies, but how we look at them and looking at them from the standpoint of test to test, let's just see what we can do as it relates to stopping people regardless what the stop may be for. Can everybody go home alive? Can everybody go home safe? When this man is on the ground screaming, what do you think I'm thinking? When he was screaming, what do you think was going through my mind? Does every black man get knocked to the ground and every person get knocked to the ground have to start screaming, begging for mama? Or begging for somebody? That's all I ask. I mean, I just want to have it where officers, when he stops a person, and we stopped somebody. I know your blood adrenaline changes when you stop somebody because you don't know what you're about to walk yourself into. But at this particular case, they were already in the situation. They didn't walk into it. They had been dealing with him for approximately 15 minutes or longer. I don't know. So I'm just, having dealt with it for that long, can we at least just have conversations where everybody can leave alive, everybody can leave feeling okay? Sir, you're being arrested. You have tested to be drunk. We're going to arrest you. Because I would have liked to have been told you've been proven to be under the influence. I would have known why I was being arrested because I probably would have questioned your test. What part did I fail? I did them all. And I just need to ask around the table, did anybody else not pass that test? Did you think he was going to jail at the end of the night? No. I didn't ask you all. I'm sorry. Y'all not my board members. Y'all okay with y'all? I'm not right. My board members, did you all pass the test? Do you all think he passed the test?
I think it's a little more than just pass or fail if you look at the totality. Right.
It was what now?
He was having trouble following the instructions. He could have been scared. I don't know.
Right, but could
It
he
was a
have,
little more than pass or fail.
could we have called somebody to pick him, could we have called somebody to pick him up?
This time, probably, and then next time.
Because every time you stop, though, understand something, every time you stop a person, it goes into the police records. Your name is there. For 20 years, how long was it there? Don't think you get away with this. If he gets stopped again, that's the story is really told. But I was told, we stop people, their name goes into the system. And once it's in the system, if he's caught doing that way again, we don't have to ask him a bunch of questions. This is your second time being stopped. And I'm not saying let anybody go that's drunk driving, because let me tell you, I know people who died from drunk driving. And I do want those people off the street. I just don't know if this was a case where I had to take him to jail and call somebody to pick him up.
Is that a recommendation that we can make of calling someone in a case where someone isn't violent? Because I think that's a really good point of.
It's DUI, if the officer has probable cause to believe that he's driving under the influence, which, and I think we're getting a little off track kind of assessing the field sobriety exercises and all that's very complicated, and we haven't had any sort of presentation or training on that. But it's statutorily, it's like a domestic battery. There are some statutorily mandated, you have to be arrested. You can't be given a notice to appear. You can't call someone to come get you. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the human element. If they thought, okay, maybe it's questionable, there's not probable cause, we're gonna let him go home. He's not driving under the influence. That's a totally separate, scenario. But in this scenario, they believed that he was driving while impaired, and at that point, he has to be arrested.
Okay, that's this question. Do you think every officer would have done the same thing? Do you think every officer would have assessed this case the same way?
I think, well, first of all, they called a DUI officer to the scene, and she's trained in going through the field sobriety exercises and what they mean, and it's not just looking at a light. I mean, the horizontal gaze nystagmus is when you're impaired, when you're looking side to side, your eyes are actually kind of twitching, moving. So I think there's a lot that we don't understand, but she was called to the scene. She's trained in assessing whether someone is impaired with alcohol. She made the assessment that he was. And so I think that any DUI officer called to the scene with her same kind of training would have made the same assessment. I mean, that's purely speculative. I shouldn't even speak to that, but I'm just saying they called a DUI trained officer to the scene because they thought that he was impaired. And based on her training and experience, she thought there was a probable cause that he was impaired. But I mean, I hear your concerns, but I do think that there is some legal, that there was probable cause to believe he was impaired, and they acted accordingly. And I think we're kind of getting a little off track with the response to resistance issue. I have three.
I'll just add, so I think the issue, the concern from the community, the uproar has been when we saw the person driving by videotaping, and we saw the baton, right? So that was a question, like, why is this guy being beaten by the police? But now that we watched it, we've heard the presentation, I think it's if we focus on was the baton used in the context of the policy, was it within policy, given the extent to which arrest was being resisted, I think it's a key question. Was he resisting arrest to the point that it warranted? I mean, there's a lot of things that led up to that, but at the point you're under arrest, we're going to put handcuffs on you, and then there's this resistance. For a number of reasons that was going through his mind. The question, I think, for the board, one of the questions is, when there was this resistance, did the baton warrant being used in that case?
I asked Officer.
And was it reasonable and was it within policy? I think those are the couple of core questions.
I agree with you, and I did digress to my emotions for a moment with watching that. Forgive me for that, because my emotions took over for a moment. I go back to the case now. I asked Major Craig, when he was here, in arresting a person, can you need them, if you can hit them in the back of that muscle when you're trying to get them down? There was an officer in front of him and behind him. I asked him, is there any possible way the training would be, the policy would be, if you're standing behind him, you need that muscle, that same muscle that knocks him to the ground. If that muscle keeps them when they're triggered, when they're down, can that muscle knock them down without having to use the baton?
So I thought, is it gonna look less, is that gonna show less physicality? I don't know. Again, if I am gonna issue a knee strike to somebody who's on the ground prone, I'm gonna have to wind up and use my knee, which is not much different than that baton utilization. It would look the same. The video passing by would see an officer, really kneeing and using.
No, he's already down though. That's how you got him down, was by kneeing him in the big muscle in the back of his leg. That, to me, I understand will cause a person to fall. And not all times.
Possibly.
Not all times, but I'm told it will, and I've told this by other officers it will. And the issue, to me, him being arrested, this is really an issue because of the reception of the beating, the baton.
Right.
If he had just been on the ground and not the baton, the beating, I don't know who'd even be having this whole conversation at this point. But the beating with the baton took it to a different level.
So just so I understand, he's allowed to be arrested for DUI, right? That happens. Policy says he's allowed to use the baton for that type of resistance. So it's the question, if we don't like what we see and we think it should be done better, then we need to make recommendations on the policy, right?
That's it.
Right.
That's all we do.
So how do we get to that?
Well, I have a couple of questions that's with that, because for number one, he did say he was ADHD. That means he has attention deficit disorder. He said he hasn't taken his medication in 2 years, which means he's letting you know, I got this mental health issue. So even with doing that field sobriety test, he ain't gonna be able to pay attention to fault direction anyway, because he has that disorder. So another thing, even with that, couldn't a breathalyzer been done to even see like what point level he was over?
Yes, and they're usually done at the jail. There are a couple of DUI units that have them that are mobile. But those detoxilizers are usually done at the detention facility once the transport is completed. In this case,
Do we not use breathalyzers
we have portable breath tests, which are performed at 2 suspensions for juveniles, but because of the way that they are, they're not utilized for the Toxilizer 5000 is what is really kind of the standard for breath tests. The way that it is a very expensive and detailed machine as to how it works. They don't use like fuel cells inside of them. They use a different a way to tell, much more accurate. And so they do use them when DUIs are completed, but once that happens at the jail, there's a series of paperwork that gets done in reference to the consent to use the breathalyzer. Instructions are done, signed, and the breathalyzer is utilized at the detention facility.
It seems like it would take some of the guesswork out though too, and did they pass this or not?
And they're permitted to, it's another criminal offense, but they're permitted to refuse a breathalyzer test. That would not take away probable cause that the officer had that he's driving impaired. They're doing the breathalyzer to add an additional element to support the case that they are impaired. But if he had said, if they offered him a breath test and he said, no, thank you, that's within his right to do, but that doesn't negate that in their training and experience, he failed to fill sobriety exercises and he's driving under the influence.
My question is, does the city expect us to have an answer for them tonight, or are we to?
Yep, in the next 5 minutes.
In fact, let me interject here. In fact, this is because I've just been listening, and a lot of what has been said covers some of these questions that have been asked, and I intentionally wrote next meeting on these questions. Because we're not going to be able to cover all this, but we do need to give these concerns, these are citizens' concerns, we do need to give them some attention with respect to this incident and with respect to the policy. Because one of them is asking about humanity within the policy, which was something that was said. That's part of one of these questions. We were going to ask the table some of the other items on the agenda in light of this particular portion of the attendance is taken and consuming most of the attendance, so I think that goes without saying. But we're going to have to have a motion to table, I guess we can incorporate it into the next meeting, the items 6 through Yeah, items 6 through 9, is there anything within those items for the next meeting? And then revisit this portion of the meeting so that we can thoroughly look at it. Because if we're gonna make policy recommendations, if we're gonna look at this with respect to some of the things that the citizens are asking us to look at, then we're just not gonna be able to do this in one night. I don't think it's fair to ask us to do it, and I don't think it's fair for the citizens to have us do a rush job over something that they feel is impassioned about. So that being said, Ms. Hubbard, you have a question?
Yes, also when come back with, do you all have a policy as far as with dealing with someone with any type of diagnosis when it comes to anything pertaining to that or any other type? Because I can see in the future too, another situation coming up where someone, so at least looking at, you know, you all's policy with dealing with someone with any type of diagnosis. So, and especially too with a DUI.
That's still, I had a similar question for the non-sworn,
Public safety.
Yeah, don't they have a name like the
customer service technicians?
Yes. Do they have certain criteria that determines when they, so for example, as soon as he said, yes, I do have ADHD, is that something where they, I don't know what the policy is, I guess, on
So the CSTs are non-sworn, they go to non-emergency calls, they may go to traffic crashes, thefts that are delayed, those type of incidents. They are trained to a certain level, but I don't know as far as like CIT training, dealing with people with mental illness, those things, I don't know that they've gone through the CIT training. They're not, if there was an issue where they went to a traffic crash and they believed that there was a DUI, they'd call an officer. Just any criminal activity that may be still on scene or happening at the time, they would call an officer. But yes, we can get training.
I just
Ms. Vogel.
I'm just moving that we move forward. I'm trying to make a motion.
I'd like to go around the room to help the board. What information, maybe each one of you, do you want me to bring back or provide you before the next meeting so you can look at it and be prepared to discuss anything that's come up tonight, any additional information? Tonight, I've already heard General Order 6, which is the arrest and alternative to arrest, was something that was brought up earlier that the board was interested in looking at.
And that's provided in the business book that we all have.
You also sent out, the policy is also in there for excessive force, am I correct? I saw that, and what you said, yes.
Yes.
We don't need that.
Thank you.
That's good.
The actual response, the report.
The actual reports, the ombudsman has them, and we're gonna provide those at the end of the meeting. So you can review all the written reports and everything before the next meeting. But I was the one that kind of said, let's hold off on distributing those so we can pay attention to what's being presented now and not be looking through these reports. We can do that.
Right.
Give us a month to really digest and analyze those before we come forward.
So can I motion that we table the remaining agenda items?
Yes.
Still going around the room. Anybody else want anything else? Okay, now you can vote.
Well, me with the mental health and, also, how is it possible that all 4 body counts fall up at the same time, around the same time? That sticks to me, you know. I'm putting it in
I actually
the
have the physical portion for the body cameras themselves, what they look like and how they operate, and the amount that they're looking at going to. It should be
So for the next meeting, a presentation on how the body cameras could be knocked off easily?
Yes.
Okay.
And review that, I know it's policy 16, but review that policy as well if time permits of the, video recording system, policy 16.
Okay.
And I'm gonna also ask the IG to,
I'll work with the ombudsman and we'll get answers to all the questions that were submitted by citizens. And we'll provide those to you as soon as possible. Probably sometime next week, at the end of next week. That'll give you plenty of time to review And then what we'll do is we will have the answers to the questions in written form, so citizens that come back, they'll be able to get those as well.
So you're gonna read the questions that they gave you tonight at the next meeting, that's what he said.
We'll compile the questions and the answers. We'll provide them to all the board members as soon as possible. But then we'll have a written copy for citizens to pick up that may come back next month with the questions and the answers.
Suggestion real quick, just to cover us and you all, maybe go ahead and read the question, so I don't want any citizens saying, hey, they didn't answer my question, so go ahead and read it, so it's out there. And we're not answering, we're just reading them and keeping it moving.
We've got a bunch of them. It's gonna be a little bit, so bear with me. And some of the handwriting isn't the best, so be patient. Are there circumstances in which civilians can call the police's reasonable suspicions into question or aware for an external investigation not connected to the police? Are the police trained in any de-escalation tactics? Do their research or, I'm not sure what that word is, information about the situations before using deadly force? About a situation before using deadly force. With the money and resources police are given for surveillance, why are they unable to locate missing civilians and or use their resources to investigate a situation without using deadly force? What is the exact policy that states exactly qualifies an officer to stop someone? What is reasonable? Who defines that? How do you avoid bias in this policy? Can you please share with the board the video with audio of the same officer's treatment of Jaquez through the end of the video? What testing accommodations are provided to him during the tests? What was the officer's name who beat Jaquez? Chairman, the video also shows an officer threatening to Baker Act Mr. Kirkland. Can that portion of the video be shown? Additionally, I'm concerned about the type of training TPD receives in order to determine whether someone should be Baker Acted. How often? Are there consequences for weaponizing Baker Act? What type of training is provided? Who provides the training? Can someone address the officer's threat to Baker Act Mr. Kirkland? Was it appropriate? If not, is that something where he can be disciplined? Throughout the presentation of policy, we are introduced to how humanity in terms of natural reactions play into the way that policy is applied. Given that officers are supposed to be trained professionals and normal citizens are not trained, do you all think it would be appropriate to somehow incorporate citizens' humanity and natural reactions into policy? Those are the questions we received. Why did the officers ambush Jaquez after 27 minutes of compliance? Okay, these have already been asked about major care. So those are the questions that we've had, and we'll compile responses as possible for those questions.
Yeah, I think, did somebody make a motion for us to table?
I think we did. Yes,
Yeah, I do a motion at the table to run agenda.
and I say.
Okay, so it's been a motion that we table the remaining part of the agenda, and it was seconded by Mr. Napier. Mr. Blue made the initial motion. Everyone in favor?
It's unanimous.
Okay. Motion moves. Motion passes, brother. We have a motion to adjourn now. Okay, Ms. Over, motion to adjourn. Ms. Bobo, Second, and the meeting's officially adjourned. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing
We
you.
have a meeting on the first, next meeting, right, it's the first?
That is the schedule.
It is scheduled July first.
Yeah.
Girl, like that.